Location: Big Bend National Park, Texas. Date: October 14th, 2009. The desert night was so clear you could see the bones of the universe. Daniel stood outside the Panther Junction Ranger Station, coffee mug warming his hands against the October chill, and stared up at a sky so dense with stars it looked like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. The Milky Way cut a luminous river from horizon to horizon, and somewhere out there, maybe 40 miles south where the park met the Mexican border, a team of university researchers was setting up telescopes to photograph tonight's lunar eclipse. He'd been a ranger at Big Bend for 6 years now, following in his father's footsteps. Miguel Torres had walked these same trails for 23 years before retiring. And before him, Daniel's grandfather had worked for the Park Service back when Big Bend was still raw and new, barely carved out of ranching land and Mexican wilderness. 3 generations of Torres men keeping watch over 800,000 acres of Chihuahuan desert, knowing its moods, respecting its dangers, understanding that the desert kept secrets in ways that forests and mountains never could. The desert was honest in its hostility. It didn't hide what it was. A place where water was scarce, where the sun could kill you as surely as any predator, where the landscape itself seemed designed to remind humans of their insignificance. Daniel appreciated that honesty. He'd grown up in Alpine, close enough to Big Bend that the park had been his backyard, his playground, his education in humility. His radio crackled. "Unit 3, this is dispatch." Daniel keyed the handset. "Go ahead, Carla. Just confirming. You're still planning to check on the UT Austin astronomy group tonight?" "That's affirmative. They're set up at the old Mariscal mine overlook. I told Dr. Chen I'd swing by around 9, make sure they have everything they need." Eclipse starts at 10:47 p.m., peaks at 11:23. Should be quite a show. If you're into that sort of thing. Daniel smiled. He was, actually. There was something about celestial events in the desert that felt different than anywhere else. The sky was so big here, so overwhelming. During the day, the horizon stretched forever in every direction, mountains in the distance looking like paper cutouts against the pale sky. At night, the stars pressed down with such intensity, it felt like you could reach up and touch the ancient light. "Have a good patrol. Stay safe out there." "Always do." Daniel finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and gathered his gear. Flashlight, first aid kit, water, always extra water, even for a short trip. Radio, GPS, his service pistol, which he wore more from regulation than any expectation of needing it. The dangers in Big Bend were sun exposure, dehydration, the occasional mountain lion or rattlesnake, not the kind of threats that required firearms. He climbed into his truck and headed south on the main park road, headlights cutting through darkness so complete it seemed to have texture. The desert at night was a different world. Sounds carried for miles. Temperature dropped 40 degrees from the daytime high, and animals emerged that you'd never see in daylight. Kit foxes, ringtails, nightjars, bats. The nocturnal residents of a place that was too harsh for most life during the day. The drive to Mariscal Mine overlook took 40 minutes, the last 10 on a rough dirt road that wound through Ocotillo and creosote bush. Daniel's headlights occasionally caught the reflection of eyes, probably javelinas, maybe a coyote. The road climbed gradually, rising toward one of the many mesa formations that dotted this section of the park. He'd always loved this area. The overlook sat on a limestone shelf that gave views across miles of desert to the Chisos Mountains in the west and the Sierra del Carmen Range in Mexico to the south. During the day, the landscape looked like Mars, rust-red dirt, ancient volcanic formations, stone that had been here for hundreds of millions of years. At night, it became something else entirely. A place where you could feel the curve of the earth, the rotation through space, the thin membrane of atmosphere that was all that separated you from the infinite void above. His grandmother would have hated that thought. Mama Josefina had been full of warnings about the desert at night, stories passed down from her own grandmother who'd lived in a village near Boquillas before the park existed. Don't whistle after dark. It attracts things. Don't stare too long at the stars. Something might stare back. And never, never ignore the cry of La Lechuza, the owl witch. the bruja who took the form of a massive owl with a woman's face, who flew on silent wings and called out to people in the voices of their loved ones. If you heard La Lechuza crying, someone was going to die. If you heard it call your name, that someone was you. Daniel had listened to these stories as a child with the mixture of fascination and skepticism that all children felt. His father had dismissed them as superstition, folklore, the kind of tales that arose in isolated communities to explain the unexplainable. But Mama Josefina had been deadly serious. She'd made Daniel promise when he told her he was going to work at Big Bend that he would respect the old warnings, that he would remember some things in the desert were older than names, older than borders, older than the people who thought they understood this land. He'd promised, of course. You didn't argue with Mama Josefina, but he'd never quite believed. In 6 years of night patrols, he'd seen owls, great horned owls, barn owls, the occasional elf owl. Just birds. Beautiful, efficient predators, but just birds. The overlook came into view, and Daniel could see the astronomy team set up immediately. They'd brought serious equipment, 3 large telescopes on sturdy tripods, camera rigs with long exposure capabilities, laptops showing star charts, red-filtered flashlights to preserve night vision. 4 people moved around the equipment, making final adjustments. The group leader, Dr. Victoria Chen, waved as Daniel's truck approached. He parked at a respectful distance to avoid kicking up dust that might settle on their optics and walked over. Victoria met him halfway, pulling off gloves to shake hands. She was in her early 30s, Daniel guessed, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused energy that came from doing work you genuinely loved. Ranger Torres, right? Thanks for checking on us. Just Daniel is fine. How's the setup going? Perfect conditions. 0 cloud cover, minimal atmospheric distortion. This is exactly what we hoped for. She gestured at the telescopes. We're doing a comparative study of lunar eclipse photography across different atmospheric conditions. Big Bend gives us some of the darkest skies in the continental U.S. You picked a good night for it. Daniel looked up. The moon hung enormous and white in the eastern sky, not yet touched by Earth's shadow. Eclipse should start in about an hour and a half. We'll be ready. Victoria introduced him to her team. Mark, a graduate student with an impressive beard. Lisa, a postdoc who was already reviewing calibration data. And James, an undergraduate who looked simultaneously excited and nervous to be on his first real research trip. Daniel did a quick safety check with them. Yes, they had plenty of water. Yes, they knew the nearest bathroom facility was back at the ranger station. Yes, they had his radio frequency if they needed anything. Yes, they understood they needed to pack out all their trash and not disturb any of the archaeological sites. There were ancient pictographs in some of the rock overhangs around here, petroglyphs that predated the Apache and Comanche, left by people whose names were lost to time. We'll be here until about 2 a.m., Victoria said. The whole eclipse sequence, plus some post-totality imaging. Then we pack up and head back to our campsite at Cottonwood. I'll check back with you around midnight, make sure everything's going smoothly. Appreciate it. Daniel started back toward his truck, then paused. The desert was quiet. Too quiet. Usually at this time of night you'd hear things. The yip of coyotes, the buzz of insects, the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush. But tonight there was nothing. Just silence, vast and heavy as the darkness itself. He looked back at the astronomy team, busy with their equipment, oblivious. Then he looked up at the sky, at that overwhelming sprawl of stars, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, he felt something he couldn't name. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition. Like the feeling you get when you walk into a room and know someone's been there just before you, the air still disturbed by their passage. Daniel shook it off. He was being ridiculous. Too many of Mama Josefina's stories in his head. He climbed into his truck and headed back down the dirt road, planning to complete a circuit of the backcountry sites before returning to check on the astronomers. He didn't see the owl watching from the top of a dead mesquite tree, its silhouette wrong against the stars, too large, shaped in ways that no owl should be shaped. He didn't hear the soft sound it made. Not a hoot, not a screech, but something closer to a woman's voice humming a lullaby in Spanish. words so old even the language had changed around them. But Victoria heard it. She looked up from the telescope alignment, frowning. "Did you guys hear that?" Mark glanced over from where he was setting up the long exposure camera. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard..." Victoria trailed off. What had she heard? Singing. It was gone now, faded into the desert silence. Never mind. Probably just the wind. There is no wind, Lisa pointed out, her eyes on her laptop screen. Conditions are dead calm. That's why the seeing is so good tonight. Victoria returned her attention to the telescope. They were using a 12-inch Newtonian reflector for the primary imaging, with 2 smaller refractors set up for comparison shots. The equipment represented about $80,000 of university funding, and this was their 3rd night out of a planned 5-night survey. So far, everything had gone perfectly. Clear skies, good atmospheric transparency, equipment functioning flawlessly. But she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her since Ranger Torres left. It wasn't anything specific, just a sense of being watched, of standing in a spotlight she couldn't see. The desert stretched away in all directions, empty and dark. There was nothing out there, nothing for miles. "Victoria, you should see this." Mark's voice held a strange note. She walked over to where he stood by the main telescope. "What is it?" "I was doing a test exposure of the moon before the eclipse starts, just to check the camera settings." He pulled up an image on his laptop. The moon filled the screen, crisp and detailed, its craters and Maria sharp in the high-resolution capture. "Looks good. What's the problem?" "Look at the edge, the terminator, where it's dark." Victoria leaned closer. At first, she didn't see anything unusual. Then Mark zoomed in on one section of the moon's edge, where the bright lunar surface met the darkness of space. There was something there. A shape. Visible only because it was slightly less dark than the space around it. It looked almost like a silhouette. A bird? No. Birds didn't fly in space. This was just... what? An artifact of the sensor? A piece of dust on the lens? "Run another exposure," she said. "Let's see if it's still there." Mark set up another shot. 30 seconds later, the new image appeared on the screen. The shape was still there, and it had moved. Just slightly, but definitely. It was closer to the moon now, as if it had drifted inward in the time between shots. "That's impossible," Lisa said, looking over their shoulders. "There's nothing that large in cislunar space. We track everything bigger than a softball. Satellites, debris, everything." "Could be a very high-altitude bird," James suggested. "Vultures can get up to like 30,000 feet. "Not high enough to appear in front of the moon at this resolution," Victoria said. She felt cold despite her jacket. "That would need to be, I don't know, really high and really big." They stood there for a moment, staring at the image. The shape was definitely bird-like. Wings, a body, something that might be a head, but the proportions were wrong. The wings were too long, too angular, and there was something about the way it was oriented, the way it seemed to be positioned, that made Victoria's stomach clench with irrational dread. "Let's keep shooting," she said, keeping her voice level. "Document everything. This could be something really interesting. A new kind of atmospheric phenomenon, maybe. Or a satellite we don't have tracking data for." But she didn't believe either of those explanations, and judging by the looks on her team's faces, neither did they. Over the next hour, they took exposure after exposure. The shape remained visible in every shot, growing steadily larger. Not closer, larger. As if whatever it was had been distant and was now approaching, drawn by their observation, by their instruments pointed at the sky, by their cameras capturing images of things that perhaps should not be captured. At 10:30, with the eclipse about to begin, Victoria heard the singing again. This time there was no mistaking it. A woman's voice, clear and beautiful, singing in Spanish. The words were just at the edge of comprehensibility. Something about stars, about watching, about ojos que miran, eyes that watch. "Okay, everyone heard that, right?" James said, his voice shaking slightly. "Tell me you all heard that." They had. All four of them stood still, listening. The singing came from somewhere to the south in the direction of the Mexican border, in the direction of nothing but miles of empty desert. It rose and fell, sometimes sounding close, sometimes far, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Maybe it's carrying from a ranch, Mark said. Sound travels weird in the desert at night. The nearest ranch is 20 miles away, Victoria said. She pulled out her phone. No signal, which was expected out here. They had a satellite phone for emergencies, but what would she even report? We're hearing singing and seeing something weird on our photos. The first bite of Earth's shadow touched the moon at 10:47 p.m. exactly. Victoria watched through the telescope as darkness began to creep across the bright lunar surface, the shadow moving with the inexorable patience of orbital mechanics. This was what they'd come for, to document the progression of the eclipse, to capture the copper-red glow of totality when the moon passed fully into Earth's umbra. But something was wrong with the shadow. Victoria, Lisa's voice was very quiet. You need to look at this exposure. Victoria moved to Lisa's station. The image on the screen showed the moon with perhaps a quarter of its surface darkened by Earth's shadow. Except the shadow wasn't quite right. At its edge, where it curved across the lunar surface, there was a break. A place where light still reached the moon even though it should have been in full shadow. Or not light exactly. Something else. Something that looked almost like a reflection, like light bouncing off a surface that wasn't the Earth, wasn't the moon, wasn't anything that should be there in the vast emptiness between. Check the ephemeris data, Victoria said, her mouth dry. Make sure we have the right timing for the eclipse. Lisa pulled up the calculations. Timing's perfect. This is exactly when the shadow should be where it is. Then what's causing that reflection? No one had an answer. The singing grew louder. It was coming from multiple directions now, definitely and definitely closer. Victoria could make out more of the words. Ancient Spanish, the kind spoken centuries ago, mixed with something that might have been Nahuatl or Apache or something even older. The song spoke of the old gods, of things that lived in the sky before humans learned to name the stars, of watchers who remembered when the moon was young. I really don't like this, James said. He'd abandoned his station and was standing close to the others, safety in numbers. Maybe we should pack up. We're not leaving, Victoria said, more sharply than she intended. They'd spent months planning this expedition, thousands of dollars on equipment and permits and travel. They were scientists. They documented phenomena. They didn't run from them. We came here to observe an eclipse, and that's what we're going to do. But her hand shook as she returned to the main telescope. The moon was half shadowed now, and the shape, that impossible bird shape that couldn't exist, was visible against its bright surface. No longer dark against space, now it showed as a silhouette against the moon itself, which meant it had moved, which meant it was between them and the moon, which meant it was enormous, larger than mountains, larger than cities. How is that possible? What could be that large and go unnoticed? How could something the size of a continent float in space without being seen, tracked, documented? Unless it didn't want to be seen. The thought came unbidden, and with it, a memory of her grandmother, her own mama, who'd grown up in Durango and never quite lost the old beliefs despite decades in Houston. She'd told Victoria stories about La Lechuza, the owl witch who served older things, things that lived in the spaces between. Victoria had dismissed them as folklore, as cultural stories meant to teach lessons about respecting the night, about not wandering where you shouldn't. But what if they weren't stories? What if they were warnings? It's looking at us, Mark whispered. He was staring through one of the smaller telescopes. Oh God, Victoria, it's looking at us. She pushed him aside, not gently, and looked through the eyepiece. The moon filled her vision, half dark, half bright, beautiful and terrible, and there, silhouetted against the brightness, the shape. She could see it clearly now through the magnification. Wings spread wide, each feather visible, each primary and secondary distinct. A body too elongated, proportions all wrong. And the head? The head was turned toward Earth, toward them. Even from 250,000 miles away, even through the telescope, Victoria could see its eyes. They weren't bird eyes. They were human eyes. A woman's eyes. Ancient and patient and hungry. She jerked back from the telescope, gasping. "Pack up, now, we're leaving." "But the eclipse—" "I said pack up." Her voice cracked. "Something is wrong. We need to get out of here." They moved fast, the discipline of months of fieldwork overriding their fear. Cameras disconnected, laptops closed, telescopes collapsed. Victoria helped Mark disassemble the main scope, her fingers fumbling with the familiar fixtures. The singing was everywhere now, surrounding them, coming from the sky and the earth and the air itself. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the singing. The desert held its breath. Even the usual sounds of their movement, footsteps on gravel, the clink of metal equipment, their own breathing, seemed muffled, as if the air itself had become thick and resistant. Victoria looked up. The moon hung in the sky, 2/3 shadowed now, approaching totality, and in front of it the shape was descending. Not falling, descending. Deliberately. Wings spread wide enough to eclipse the moon themselves, each feather edged with a light that wasn't light, a glow that hurt to look at directly. It was impossibly far away and impossibly close at the same time. Distance losing meaning when faced with something that existed on scales the human mind wasn't designed to comprehend. "Get to the vehicles," Victoria said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Move. Now." They ran. Equipment forgotten, carefully calibrated instruments abandoned. They ran for the 3 vehicles parked at the overlook edge. Victoria's hand closed on her key fob, thumb jamming the unlock button. The car's lights flashed, absurdly normal, absurdly trivial, and she yanked the door open. Behind her, Lisa screamed. Victoria spun. Lisa had stopped running, frozen in place, staring at something. Victoria followed her gaze and saw it. A figure standing on top of one of the telescopes they'd abandoned. Human-sized now, or seeming to be, though the proportions were still wrong. A woman in dark clothes, or was it feathers? The light from the moon, what was left of it, seemed to slide off her strangely, pooling in wrong places, creating shadows where there should be none. The figure's head turned toward them, and Victoria saw the face. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was ancient beyond measure and young as starlight. It was her grandmother's face and her mother's face and her own face, and it was none of those things because it wasn't a face at all. It was a mask, something wearing the approximate shape of human features because that shape was convenient, because that shape could be understood, however imperfectly. "Mirren," it said, and the voice was the singing from before, was every voice Victoria had ever heard, was the sound of stars moving through space and time, grinding forward, and civilizations rising and falling. "Miren las estrellas, miren lo que ven." Look at the stars. Look at what they see. "Get in the car." Victoria shoved Lisa forward, breaking whatever paralysis held her. They scrambled into the vehicle, all 4 of them piling in, door slamming. Victoria's hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, caught, roared to life. The figure didn't move. It simply watched them, standing on the telescope, head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. One hand, if it was a hand, raised in something that might have been a wave, might have been a gesture of dismissal, might have been something else entirely. Victoria floored the accelerator. The car shot forward, gravel spraying, headlights cutting through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, she saw the figure's shape change, flowing upward, wings spreading, lifting into the sky. It was small now, owl-sized. Then it was large again, too large, blotting out stars as it rose. They drove without speaking, the dirt road rough under the tires, the night pressing in from all sides. It wasn't until they hit the main park road that anyone said anything. "What was that?" James's voice was very small. "I don't know," Victoria said, and then, more honestly, "Something old, something that was here before us and will be here after us, something we shouldn't have looked at." "The photos," Mark said suddenly. "We got photos, documentation, the university, Leave it, Victoria said. All of it. The equipment, the data, everything. We tell them it was stolen. We tell them we had technical failures. We tell them anything except what actually happened. But, Mark, she glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Do you really want to try to explain what we saw? Do you want to show people those pictures and have them ask questions we can't answer? Do you want to spend the rest of your life wondering if looking at it means it's looking back? Silence. They knew she was right. Daniel was heading back to check on the astronomy team when his radio crackled to life. All units, we have a Code 3 emergency call on the satellite line. Astronomy Research Group requesting immediate assistance. He grabbed the handset. Unit 3 responding, I'm 5 minutes from their location. What's the nature of the emergency? Unknown. Caller, Dr. Chen, stated they need to leave the site immediately. Sounded extremely distressed. Connection dropped before I could get details. Daniel's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck bounced over the rough road, headlights jerking across Mesquite and Ocotillo. What could have happened? Equipment failure? Someone injured? He ran through possibilities. Snakebite, scorpion sting, heat stroke, although it was cold, maybe a cardiac event. The overlook came into view and Daniel hit the brakes. The astronomy team's vehicles were gone. Only the abandoned equipment remained, scattered across the site as if they'd left in a hurry. Telescopes still assembled, cameras still set up, laptops closed but left behind. Nobody just abandoned this much expensive equipment. He parked and got out, flashlight sweeping across the scene. Dr. Chen? Victoria? Anyone here? No response. The desert was utterly silent. Not even the wind. Daniel walked slowly through the equipment, cataloging what he saw. No signs of struggle. No blood. No torn clothing. Nothing that indicated violence or injury. Just abandonment, as if they'd been in the middle of their observations and then suddenly left, taking nothing with them. He looked up at the sky. The eclipse was at totality now. The moon a dim copper-red disk suspended in the vastness. Beautiful. He'd seen lunar eclipses before, but never from somewhere with skies this dark. The stars were overwhelming, countless billions of them. And Daniel froze. For just a moment, just a heartbeat, he saw it. A shape. Vast, and impossibly distant, and impossibly close. Wings spread against the stars, blocking constellations that had been visible just moments before. A silhouette that was darker than space, darker than absence, darker than anything should be. And eyes. Ancient eyes that had watched the earth form, that had seen the first single-celled organisms crawl from the ocean, that had observed every extinction and every emergence and every brief flicker of consciousness that called itself human. Eyes that saw him now, then it was gone. And there was just the sky, just the eclipsed moon, just the stars in their familiar patterns. But Daniel stood there, flashlight hanging loose in his hand, and understood with sudden certainty that he was not alone. Had never been alone. None of them had. Every night when they looked up at the sky, something looked back. Something old and patient and utterly indifferent to human desires, human fear, human existence. La Lechuza wasn't a witch. It wasn't folklore. It was a name given to something that couldn't truly be named, a way of making sense of something that existed beyond sense. His grandmother had known. Generations before her had known. They'd seen it peripherally, in moments when the barrier between the mundane world and the vast cosmos grew thin. And now he knew too. Daniel's radio crackled. Unit 3, do you copy? Did you locate the research team? He raised the radio to his lips, surprised his hand was steady. Negative. They've evacuated the site. Equipment is here, but they're gone. I'm going to pack up what I can and secure the scene. Copy that. They called again from the main road, said they were driving straight through to Alpine. Wouldn't give any details about what happened. Understood. Torres out. He spent the next hour carefully packing the telescopes, the cameras, the laptops. Everything except one item. A laptop that had been left open, showing a final image on its screen. The moon in partial eclipse, and in front of it, A silhouette. A shape that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist, that made his eyes hurt to look at directly. Daniel closed the laptop without saving the image. Some things, he thought, weren't meant to be documented. Some observations weren't meant to be recorded. The universe was vast and strange and full of things that lived in the gaps between human understanding, things that predated human existence and would continue long after humanity was dust, things that watched. He loaded the equipment into his truck and drove back to the ranger station, the eclipsed moon following him the whole way, copper red and alien in the sky. Tomorrow he would file a report about abandoned equipment and a research team that had cut their survey short for undisclosed reasons. He would not mention the shape. He would not mention the eyes. He would not mention the singing that he'd heard, faintly, carried on a wind that wasn't blowing. Because what would he say? That his grandmother's stories were true? That La Lechuza was real and vast and older than names? That there were things in the desert night that science couldn't measure, that instruments couldn't capture, that existed in scales and dimensions human minds weren't built to comprehend? No one would believe him. And maybe that was mercy. Maybe not knowing, not seeing, was a gift humanity had given itself. The ability to look up at the sky and see only stars, to observe an eclipse and see only shadow, to study the cosmos without understanding that the cosmos was studying back. When Daniel got home that night, early morning really, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east, he called his father. "Pa, I need to talk to you about something." "What's wrong, mijo?" "Remember the stories Mama Josefina used to tell about La Lechuza?" Silence on the line, then quietly, "Yes." "Were they true?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Some things, Daniel, are true whether we believe them or not. The old people knew that. They knew there are things in this world and beyond it that we don't understand, that we can't understand, and they knew that sometimes ignorance is survival. I saw something tonight, Pa. I know, you wouldn't be calling if you hadn't." His father's voice was heavy with something that might have been sympathy, might have been recognition, might have been the weight of 3 generations of Torres men learning the same hard truth about the desert and the sky. Now you have to decide what you're going to do with that knowledge. What did you do when you saw? I kept working. I kept my head down. I respected the old warnings, and I never ever looked at the stars quite the same way again. Daniel stood at his window, watching the dawn break over the mountains. The eclipsed moon was setting in the west, returning to its normal color as it slipped below the horizon. In a few hours, tourists would drive into the park. Families would hike the trails. People would look up at the sky and see only beauty, only the simple wonder of nature. And he would let them, because maybe that innocence was precious. Maybe not knowing was its own kind of blessing. But he would remember. On clear nights when the stars pressed down with too much intensity, when the desert was too quiet, when the singing drifted on winds that weren't blowing, he would remember. And he would tell himself it was just folklore, just stories, just the legends of old people trying to make sense of a big universe. He would tell himself that. But he wouldn't believe it. Brr. Victoria never went back to Big Bend. She submitted her resignation to the university 3 weeks later, citing personal reasons. The equipment was eventually recovered from the overlooked site, returned to the astronomy department. The hard drives were corrupted, the data unrecoverable. A technical glitch, the IT department said. Solar flares sometimes did that to electronics. The corrupted files sat in a storage cabinet for 2 years before being disposed of as part of routine data management. No one looked closely enough to notice that the corruption wasn't random noise. That buried in the static and broken bits, there were patterns, fractals, mathematical relationships that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. Images of wings. And if you looked at them long enough, if you adjusted the contrast just right, you could see the eyes staring back. Patient, eternal, watching, always watching. Location, North Cascades National Park, Washington. Date, March 12, 2011. The mountains wore their winter colors like a warning. Evelyn Torres had been a ranger at North Cascades for exactly 4 months, and she still hadn't gotten used to how the landscape could shift from beautiful to hostile in the space between one breath and the next. This morning the peaks were invisible, wrapped in clouds that hung so low they merged with the fog rising from the valleys. The Douglas firs and western hemlocks emerged from the white like dark pillars holding up nothing, their branches heavy with yesterday's snowfall that hadn't quite melted despite the warming temperatures. She stood outside the Marble Mount Ranger Station at 7:30 in the morning, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm in her thermos while she studied the weather report on the outdated computer inside. March in the North Cascades was unpredictable. One day you'd have clear skies and temperatures in the 50s. The next you'd be back in full winter with fresh snow and wind chills below freezing. Today fell somewhere in between, 42 degrees at the valley floor, fog advisory until noon, visibility less than a quarter mile in places. Not dangerous, necessarily, but not ideal for hiking either. The overnight trail registry showed only one group had signed in for backcountry camping, 4 people planning a 2-night trip on the Cascade Pass Trail. They'd checked in yesterday morning at 9, planning to camp at the designated site near Pelton Basin and return Sunday afternoon. Standard route, nothing concerning. The names were listed in neat handwriting. Tyler Reeves, Madison Cho, Kyle Patterson, Samantha Costa. Ages 24 to 27. Contact number for Tyler. Emergency contact information complete. They'd done everything right. Evelyn had checked them in herself, actually. She remembered them. 4 friends from Seattle, all with decent gear and appropriate clothing layers, clearly experienced enough to know what they were doing. Tyler had asked intelligent questions about current trail conditions and snow depth at higher elevations. Madison had been studying a detailed topographic map, making notes about elevation gain. They'd seemed competent, prepared, exactly the kind of visitors who rarely caused problems. Still, something about this morning made Evelyn uneasy. Maybe it was just the fog, the way it made familiar landmarks disappear and turned the forest into something labyrinthine and strange. Maybe it was the silence, not peaceful silence, but the heavy quiet that came when sound didn't carry properly, when the air itself seemed to muffle everything. Or maybe it was the fact that today marked exactly 4 months since she'd started this job, and she was still very aware of being the newest, least experienced person on the ranger staff. She'd been a high school biology teacher for 6 years before this, had loved the work, loved the kids, but something had been missing. She'd grown up hiking and camping with her parents throughout the Pacific Northwest, had always felt more alive in the mountains than anywhere else, and the teaching job, with its fluorescent lights and recycled air and endless administrative requirements, had started to feel like a cage. When the ranger position opened up at North Cascades, she'd applied almost on impulse, not really expecting to get it. But she had gotten it, had completed the training, passed the certifications, learned the radio codes and GPS coordinates and emergency protocols, had spent 4 months proving to herself and everyone else that she could do this job, that the transition from classroom to wilderness hadn't been a mistake. Most days she felt confident. Most days she felt like she belonged here. Today wasn't one of those days. The radio on her belt crackled. Marble Mount, this is New Halem Base. Evelyn unclipped it. Go ahead, New Halem. Just checking in. You got that fog as thick as we do? Affirmative, can't see more than 100 feet. Yeah, same here. We're recommending all visitors postpone day hikes until conditions improve. How many groups you got in the backcountry? Just 1. 4 people on Cascade Pass due back tomorrow afternoon. Copy. They should be fine if they're already at their campsite. This fog's supposed to burn off by noon anyway. Just keep an eye on the weather and let us know if anything changes. Will do. Evelyn clipped the radio back and finished her coffee, grimacing at the cold, bitter taste. The sun was technically up now, though you couldn't tell by looking. The fog glowed with diffuse light that came from everywhere and nowhere, making it impossible to determine direction or distance. Trees appeared suddenly as dark shapes that could be 10 feet away or 50. The parking area, visible from the station yesterday, had disappeared entirely. She went back inside to update the daily log and check email. Standard administrative work. the kind of thing she'd hoped to leave behind when she quit teaching but had quickly discovered was part of every job. Trail condition reports, weather updates, a reminder about an upcoming training session on bear safety protocols, an email from her supervisor complimenting her work on last month's visitor education programs. By 9 o'clock, the fog still hadn't lifted, but the parking area was starting to fill with disappointed day hikers who'd driven up from Seattle or Bellingham hoping for clear weather. Evelyn spent an hour explaining conditions, recommending they postpone their hikes or visit the visitor center instead, being patient with the ones who argued that they'd driven all this way and couldn't the rangers do something about the fog. Around 10:30 things finally quieted down. Most of the visitors had either left or headed to the visitor center. Evelyn was about to start her routine patrol of the nearby trails when her cell phone rang. Her personal phone, not the ranger station line. Unknown number, but local area code. Hello? Hi, is this North Cascades Ranger Station? Male voice, young, stressed. Background noise that sounded like wind and movement. This is Ranger Torres. Who am I speaking with? Tyler Reeves. My friends and we checked in with you yesterday morning. 4 of us going to Cascade Pass? Evelyn felt a spike of concern. Yes, I remember. Is everything okay? We don't know. Something weird is happening. We need help. She grabbed a pen and notepad automatically. Are any of you injured? Do you need medical evacuation? No, we're not hurt. We can't get out. We've been trying to hike out since 7 this morning and we keep ending up back at the same place. Evelyn paused. I'm not sure I understand. You're lost? No, we're not lost. We know exactly where we are. We're on the trail, following it downhill like we're supposed to, and after maybe 45 minutes of hiking, we end up back at our campsite. The exact same campsite. We've tried 3 times now and it keeps happening. You're going in circles, accidentally doubling back. That's what we thought at first. Tyler's voice had an edge of panic now. But we're being careful. We're watching the trail markers. We're using our compass and GPS. We're going downhill, consistently downhill, and the trail isn't branching or turning back on itself. It's impossible, but it keeps happening. We hike for about 45 minutes, always descending, and then we come around a corner and there's our campsite again. Same trees, same tent, same everything. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. What's your current location? Pelton Basin campsite like we planned, about 6 miles up the Cascade Pass trail. And you're all together? All 4 of you? Yes, we're all here. Nobody's injured. We've got food and water and our gear is fine. We can't leave. Every time we try to hike out, we end up right back here. This didn't make sense. Evelyn had hiked the Cascade Pass trail a dozen times during her training. It was well marked, well maintained, essentially impossible to get lost on. You followed it uphill to the pass, or you followed it downhill to the trailhead. There were no loops, no confusing intersections, nothing that would cause someone to accidentally circle back to their starting point. Okay, Tyler, I need you to stay calm. Have you tried hiking in the opposite direction? Uphill toward the pass instead of down toward the trailhead? We thought about it, but that doesn't make sense, right? The pass is higher elevation. It would take us farther from help, not closer. I understand, but I need you to try it. Hike uphill for 30 minutes and tell me what happens. Can you do that? A pause. She could hear Tyler conferring with his friends, muffled voices in the background. Then, yeah, okay, we'll try it. Should I call you back? Yes. Or if you lose cell signal, try your radio if you have one. We've got a 2-way radio, but we haven't been able to reach anyone on it. That was odd. The park's repeater system should have covered that area. Keep trying. And Tyler, I want you to do something else. When you start hiking, have someone in your group count steps and pay attention to landmarks, specific trees, rocks, anything distinctive. Take photos if you can. I need to know if you're actually moving through space or if something else is going on. Something else like what? Evelyn didn't have an answer to that. Just do what I asked and call me back in 30 minutes. If I don't hear from you by 11:15, I'm sending a search team. Okay, thank you, we'll call back. The line went dead. Evelyn immediately radioed New Halem Base and reported the situation. Her supervisor, a man named Bill Crawford, who'd been a ranger for 23 years, listened without interrupting. That's strange, he said when she finished. You thinking they're disoriented? Altitude sickness, maybe? They're at 6,500 feet. Altitude sickness is possible, but unlikely at that elevation for people who live in Seattle. And all four of them experiencing the same disorientation simultaneously seems improbable. Equipment malfunction? GPS error? They said they're using compass too, and they can see the trail markers. Bill was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, I'm going to be straight with you. In 23 years, I've seen people get lost in every way imaginable. But I've never seen anyone get lost on the Cascade Pass Trail. It's too straightforward. If they're really experiencing what they say they're experiencing, then what? I don't know, but I don't like it. Fog this thick can play tricks on perception. Sound doesn't travel right, distances get hard to judge. Could be they're more disoriented than they realize. Should I organize a search team? Not yet. Wait for their callback. If they can't navigate out in the next hour or if conditions deteriorate, we'll send a team up. But Evelyn, I want you to pull the file on that trail. Any incident reports from the past few years. Any unusual complaints or observations. Sometimes patterns emerge that aren't obvious until you look for them. Copy that. Evelyn spent the next 20 minutes digging through old incident reports filed under the Cascade Pass Trail designation. Most were routine. Sprained ankles, altitude sickness, minor equipment failures. But she found 3 reports that made her pause. June 2008, day hiker reported feeling watched and hearing footsteps paralleling the trail, despite seeing no one else in the area. Attributed to wildlife, no action taken. September 2009, couple reported becoming temporarily disoriented near Pelton Basin, spending much longer than expected, reaching their intended campsite despite following trail markers. No medical issues, attributed to fatigue. April 2010. Solo hiker claimed to have taken a wrong turn that shouldn't exist and ended up back where I started before finding the correct trail. No physical evidence of alternative trail found during follow-up inspection. 3 reports over 3 years. Not enough to establish a pattern, but enough to suggest something odd about that particular area. Evelyn was about to dig deeper when her cell phone rang again. Tyler? Yeah, it's me. His voice sounded shakier now. We tried hiking uphill like you said. And? Same thing. We hiked for 32 minutes. Madison counted the whole time, and Kyle was marking trees with chalk every 100 paces. We went uphill the entire time, never turned around, never deviated from the trail. And then we came around a bend and there was our campsite again. You're certain it's the same campsite? Not just a similar looking area? I'm standing next to our tent right now. Same tent we left an hour ago. Same arrangement of gear. Samantha left a granola bar wrapper on a log as a test. It's still there. We've hiked in 2 different directions, and both times we've ended up back here. Evelyn felt her training colliding with something that didn't fit into any of the scenarios she'd been taught to handle. Lost hikers, injured hikers, stranded hikers. Those were problems with clear solutions. But hikers who couldn't leave an area despite following correct procedures, that wasn't in any manual. Okay, Tyler, listen carefully. I need all 4 of you to stay exactly where you are. Don't try to hike out again. Conserve your energy and your resources. I'm organizing a search and rescue team and we'll come to you. How long will that take? She checked her watch. 11:05. The fog was still heavy, but it did seem to be lifting slightly. We'll need about 2 hours to assemble the team and hike in, so expect us around 1:30, maybe 2 o'clock. Can you hold out that long? Yeah, we've got plenty of supplies, but Ranger Torres, there's something else. What? The birds stopped singing about an hour ago, and we keep hearing sounds in the forest around us, like tapping, like something tapping on the tree trunks in a pattern. It stops when we try to locate it, then starts up again somewhere else. The chill Evelyn had felt earlier intensified. Have you seen anything? Any wildlife? No, nothing. The forest feels empty except for that tapping sound. Stay together. Don't split up for any reason. If the tapping gets closer, or if you see anything unusual, call me immediately. Okay, we will. After hanging up, Evelyn immediately called Bill Crawford and explained the update. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had changed, less skeptical now, more concerned. Evelyn, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Have you heard the old stories about the North Cascades? The Salish stories? Some. My parents mentioned them when we used to hike here, but I always thought they were just folklore. Most folklore starts somewhere. The Salish people who lived here for thousands of years had stories about spirits in the deep forest. Called them different names. Stick Indians was the most common English translation, though that's not quite accurate. Supposed to be tricksters, or guardians, or something in between. The stories said they could make trails turn back on themselves. Could trap people in loops of space that didn't follow normal rules. Could make hikers walk in circles without realizing it. Bill, are you seriously suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what the old stories say. And I'm telling you that in 23 years, I've heard 4 or 5 reports that sound similar to what you're describing. Always in the same general area, the basin between Cascade Pass and the lower trail. Always involving people who suddenly can't navigate out despite doing everything right. Usually resolves itself after a few hours, sometimes after a day. People eventually walk out confused but unharmed. Usually. There was one case in 1997 before you were here. 2 experienced hikers went missing in that area for 3 days. When they finally emerged, they claimed they'd only been hiking for about 6 hours. Couldn't account for the missing time. Their watches had stopped. Their GPS showed impossible readings. Search and rescue found them dehydrated and hypothermic, but they'd had plenty of food and water in their packs that they insisted they'd tried to use. Evelyn felt something cold settling in her stomach. What are you telling me to do? I'm telling you to take this seriously, even if it doesn't make rational sense. Get a team together, but be careful. Make sure everyone stays in visual contact. Don't let anyone wander off alone. And Evelyn, take tobacco. Tobacco? It's traditional, an offering. The old way of showing respect when you enter certain places. I know how that sounds, but trust me on this. Take a pouch of loose tobacco and leave it at the trailhead before you go in. Can't hurt, might help. Bill, I'll authorize the search and rescue operation officially. You'll take Dave Martinez with you. He's Salish. Grew up hearing these stories, he'll understand. Get another 2 people, minimum 4 on the team. Leave within the hour. And Evelyn, come back with everyone. I mean everyone. Don't leave anyone behind no matter what. The line went dead. Tyler Reeves had been working as a software engineer in Seattle for 3 years, and he'd gotten into the habit of treating everything like a logic problem. Input, process, output, cause and effect. When something didn't work, you debugged it. You found the error in the code and fixed it. But there was no debugging this. He sat on a log near the tent. His 3 best friends clustered around him and tried to make sense of something that didn't follow any logical rules. They'd hiked the Cascade Pass trail before 2 years ago, and it had been straightforward. You went up, or you went down. The trail was well marked. You couldn't get lost if you tried. And yet they'd been trapped here for over 4 hours now. Madison Cho sat next to him, her topographic map spread across her knees, running calculations on her phone. She was an architect, methodical and precise, someone who thought in 3 dimensions and understood space better than anyone Tyler knew. If anyone could figure out what was happening, it should be her. It doesn't work, she said finally, her voice tight with frustration. The elevation change is wrong. According to my GPS, we descended 430 feet in that first attempt. That should have taken us at least a third of the way back to the trailhead. But we ended up here, where we started, at the same elevation. The elevation change didn't persist. Kyle Patterson, who'd been Tyler's roommate in college and was now a physical therapist, looked up from where he'd been examining the chalk marks on nearby trees. I marked trees every 100 paces like you said. 23 marks total. which means we walked at least 2,300 paces. My stride is about 2.5 feet, so that's almost 5,700 feet of linear distance, over a mile. But we're sitting in a clearing that's maybe 50 yards across. Samantha Costa, Sam to everyone who knew her, was the quietest of the group normally, a graphic designer who spent most of her time listening rather than talking. But now she spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear Tyler could see in her eyes. We need to talk about what's really happening here. This isn't a navigation error. This isn't us being stupid or careless. Something is wrong with space itself in this area. That's impossible, Tyler said automatically, but the words felt hollow. Is it? Sam gestured around them. We've been measuring and documenting everything. We know exactly what we're doing. We know how to use a compass and a GPS and how to read trail markers. And yet we can't leave. What's the rational explanation for that? Tyler didn't have one. That was the problem. He'd been running through possibilities all morning. Equipment malfunction, group hallucination, some kind of gas leak causing shared delirium. And none of them fit the facts. They were all thinking clearly. Their equipment worked. They could see the trail, follow it precisely, and still end up back where they started. The ranger's coming, Madison said quietly. She'll figure it out. That's her job. What if she gets trapped too? Kyle asked. What if this whole area is some kind of, some kind of anomaly and everyone who comes in here gets stuck? Then eventually someone will notice and send help from outside. They'll figure out what's happening and fix it. Will they? Sam was looking at the trees surrounding their campsite, her expression distant. Tyler, do you remember what that old man at the trailhead said yesterday, when we were signing in? Tyler did remember. There'd been an elderly indigenous man sitting on a bench near the ranger station, watching them prepare for their hike. He'd approached as they were about to start, moving slowly, leaning on a carved walking stick. You kids heading up to Cascade Pass? He'd asked. They'd confirmed they were. Be careful up there. Stay on the trail. Don't listen to anything you hear off in the trees. And if you see anyone else up there, anyone at all, don't follow them, even if they look familiar. At the time, Tyler had assumed it was just the kind of vague warning old-timers like to give young hikers. Be safe, be prepared, watch out for dangers both real and imagined. He'd thanked the man politely, and they'd started hiking. Now the warning felt more specific, more urgent. What do you think he meant? Sam asked. About not following anyone even if they look familiar? Probably just talking about getting separated, Madison said, but she didn't sound convinced. Kyle stood up abruptly. Okay, this is getting too weird. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever, but something is definitely wrong here and I don't want to wait around to find out what. Let's try one more time. All four of us, staying within arm's reach of each other. We'll hike down and we won't stop for anything until we reach the trailhead. The ranger said to stay here, Tyler reminded him. The ranger doesn't understand what's happening. We're wasting time. Come on. Tyler wanted to argue, but part of him agreed. Sitting here waiting felt passive, helpless. They were young, healthy, experienced hikers. They should be able to walk out of their own campsite. Fine, he said, but we do this smart. Full packs, all supplies like we're not coming back, and we all stay together. Nobody gets more than 5 feet from anyone else. They broke camp quickly. They'd done it enough times that it was almost automatic. Tent collapsed and rolled, sleeping bags stuffed into compression sacks, food and water secured. Within 15 minutes they were ready, standing at the edge of the campsite where the trail continued downhill into the fog. The tapping sound started again. It came from somewhere to their left, in the dense forest off the trail. A rhythmic sound wood on wood like someone knocking on tree trunks in a deliberate pattern. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. It moved as they listened, circling around them, always staying just out of sight. What is that? Madison whispered. Animal, probably, Tyler said, trying to sound confident. Woodpecker or something. Woodpeckers don't tap in patterns. The sound stopped. The forest went silent again. That heavy, muffled silence that felt wrong, that felt like the world was holding its breath. "Let's just go," Sam said. "Now, before it starts again." They began hiking downhill, staying close together as promised. Tyler led, followed by Madison, then Sam, with Kyle bringing up the rear. They moved at a steady pace, not hurrying but not dawdling either. The trail was clear, well maintained, descending steadily into the fog. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. They were moving downhill consistently. Tyler could feel it in his knees, in the way his pack's weight shifted forward. They passed landmarks he recognized from previous attempts. A distinctive twisted tree, a large boulder with a flat top, a section where the trail narrowed between two old-growth firs. 20 minutes. 25. They should be making good progress now, putting real distance between themselves and the campsite. 30 minutes. Tyler's legs were burning from the sustained descent. His GPS showed they'd dropped almost 600 feet in elevation. That was significant. That was real progress. And then they came around a familiar bend and saw the clearing ahead, and Tyler felt his stomach drop. Their campsite. The exact same spot they'd left 30 minutes ago. "No," Madison said. "No, that's not possible. We went downhill the entire time." Kyle pulled out his phone, showing them the tracking app he'd been running. "Look, we've moved. The GPS shows we traveled almost 2 miles. We changed elevation. We didn't turn around. We didn't double back. We went in a straight line downhill. Then how are we here?" Sam's voice was rising now, panic creeping in. "How are we back at the same place?" Tyler walked forward into the clearing, examining the ground. There were their boot prints from earlier attempts, still visible in the damp soil. There was the flat rock where they'd set up their camp stove. There was the tree he'd tied the bear bag line to. And there, on a log at the edge of the clearing, was the granola bar wrapper Sam had left as a test marker, still sitting exactly where she'd placed it 4 hours ago. "We never left," Tyler said quietly. "We think we're moving, we feel like we're moving, but somehow we never actually leave this spot. That's impossible." "I know." The tapping started again, closer now. All around them, coming from multiple directions at once. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, 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 tap. Like something was communicating, coordinating, surrounding them. And then Sam grabbed Tyler's arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Tyler, look at the trees." He looked where she was pointing. In the fog surrounding their campsite, shapes were moving. Not animal shapes. Not human shapes either, exactly. They were tall and thin, moving with a strange, jerky gait that didn't look natural. They stayed just at the edge of visibility, always in the peripheral vision, never quite clear enough to see directly. "Are those people?" Madison whispered. "I don't think so," Kyle said. The shapes moved closer, and Tyler could see them better now. They were made of sticks, that was the only way he could think to describe it. Bundles of branches and twigs, somehow moving with purpose, somehow standing upright, somehow watching them with eyes that shouldn't exist but did, glowing faintly in the shadows. The old man's warning echoed in his memory. "Don't listen to anything you hear off in the trees. Don't follow anyone, even if they look familiar." "Back to back," Tyler said, keeping his voice low and steady despite the terror rising in his throat. "Form a circle. Don't look directly at them. Don't respond to anything they do." The 4 friends pressed together, each facing outward, covering all directions. The stick figures circled them slowly, never getting too close but never backing away either. The tapping continued, and Tyler realized it was coming from them. They were striking the trees as they moved, marking their territory, announcing their presence. His phone rang, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet. He fumbled for it, nearly dropping it, and saw Ranger Torres's name on the screen. "We're in trouble," he said as soon as he answered. "There's something here. Something surrounding us. Tyler, listen to me very carefully." The ranger's voice was tight with urgency. "Do not engage with anything you see. Do not speak to it. Don't acknowledge it. Don't make eye contact. I'm coming with a team. We'll be there in 90 minutes. Can you hold out that long? I don't know what happens if we can't." Then you find a way. Stay together, stay strong. I'm coming. The line went dead just as the stick figures rushed forward all at once. Evelyn Torres had assembled her team in record time. Dave Martinez, the Salish ranger Bill had mentioned, plus 2 experienced search and rescue volunteers named Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb. All 4 of them stood in the Marble Mount parking area, loading packs with extra supplies while Evelyn briefed them on the situation. She left out the parts about stick Indians and folkloric anomalies. Stuck to the facts. 4 hikers trapped in a spatial loop, unable to navigate out, reporting unusual phenomena. Possible psychological distress, possible environmental factors, definite need for immediate extraction. Dave Martinez didn't say anything while she talked, but she caught the look he exchanged with Sarah. They knew. They understood what she wasn't saying. Before we go, Dave said quietly, I need to do something. He pulled a small leather pouch from his pack and walked to the trailhead marker. Evelyn watched as he opened the pouch, revealing loose tobacco, and scattered a pinch on the ground at the base of the marker. He spoke in a language she didn't understand. Lushootseed, she guessed, the language of the Coast Salish peoples. His voice was respectful, measured, asking for something or offering something or both. When he finished, he turned back to the team. Okay, we can go now. They started up the trail at a quick pace, faster than normal but sustainable. 6 miles to Pelton Basin campsite, elevation gain of about 4,000 feet. In good conditions with light packs, maybe 2.5 hours. Today, with full rescue gear and heavy fog, they were aiming for under 3. The fog was lifting gradually, visibility improving from 100 feet to maybe 300. They could see the trail ahead clearly enough now, could see the massive trees looming on either side. Douglas firs 6 feet in diameter, western red cedars that had been growing since before the first Europeans arrived in this region. The forest here was old, ancient, timeless in a way that made human concerns feel temporary and small. Evelyn found herself hiking next to Dave as the trail steepened. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. The stories Bill mentioned, the stick Indians, are they real? Dave was quiet for several strides. Real is a complicated word. Are they physical beings you can touch and photograph? Probably not. Are they forces that exist in certain places that can affect people who enter those places? Yeah, I'd say so. How does that work? I'm not sure it's about how. Different peoples have different names for them. We call them Sinulkai and Lushootseed. Roughly translates to stick people or tree people. Other tribes have other names. But the basic idea is consistent. There are beings in the deep forest that don't follow human rules. They're tricksters sometimes, teachers other times, dangerous if disrespected. They can change how space works, make trails loop back on themselves, make time move differently. But that's not scientifically possible. Neither is quantum entanglement until you measure it and find out it is. Dave smiled slightly. I'm not asking you to believe in magic, Ranger Torres. I'm just asking you to keep an open mind about what's possible. These mountains were here long before we named them parks, long before we drew maps and established trails. There are old places in the world where old things still live, and sometimes they remind us that we're visitors here, not owners. They hiked in silence after that, climbing steadily. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. The fog had lifted enough that they could see the peaks above them now, snow-covered and jagged against the gray sky. Beautiful and hostile at the same time, the way mountains always were. At 2 hours and 20 minutes, they reached Pelton Basin. The campsite was exactly where it should be, exactly as described. A small clearing, flat area for tents, ring of stones for a fire. But no tent, no gear, no people. Tyler, Evelyn called. Madison, Kyle, Samantha. Her voice echoed strangely in the basin, bouncing off the surrounding ridges in a way that made it sound like multiple people calling at once. No response. They should be here, Sarah said, checking her GPS. This is the registered campsite. Fan out, Evelyn ordered. Search pattern 20-yard radius. Stay in visual contact. They spread out, examining the area carefully. And within minutes, Dave called out, "Over here, I found something." Evelyn joined him at the edge of the clearing. He was crouching near a tree, pointing at marks on the trunk. Fresh marks, carved or scratched into the bark. Not random, deliberate, patterned. A series of lines and symbols that looked almost like writing, but in no alphabet Evelyn recognized. "These are warnings," Dave said. "Old style, the kind my grandfather taught me about. They mark territory. They say, this place is claimed, this place is occupied. Proceed with respect or not at all." Who made them? Not who. What? Sarah's radio crackled. "Evelyn, you need to see this." They found her on the opposite side of the clearing, standing next to a pile of equipment. 4 backpacks arranged neatly, 4 sleeping bags rolled and stacked, a tent still in its stuff sack, all the gear from the missing hikers, organized and abandoned. "They wouldn't leave this," Marcus said. "Not voluntarily, not in March in the mountains." Evelyn keyed her radio. "New Hallam Base, this is Unit 7. We've reached Pelton Basin campsite. The hikers are not present, but we've found their equipment. Requesting additional support and possible helicopter evac if weather permits. Static. Then more static." She adjusted the frequency and tried again. "New Hallam Base, do you copy?" Nothing. Just the empty hiss of dead air. "That's not right," Marcus said. "We should have clear contact from here." Dave was examining the tree line, his expression tense. "We need to leave. Now. We can't leave without the hikers. We can't help them if we get trapped too." He pointed into the forest. "Look. Really look." Evelyn looked where he indicated and felt her breath catch. In the trees surrounding the clearing, shapes were moving. Tall, thin shapes that seemed to be made of branches and shadow, moving with a stilted gait that wasn't quite right. They stayed just at the edge of visibility, always in peripheral vision, never quite clear enough to focus on directly. And they were coming closer. "What are those?" Sarah whispered. "Sinulkai," Dave said. "The stick people. We're in their territory now, and they're not happy about it." The shapes circled the clearing slowly, and Evelyn could hear it now. The tapping sound Tyler had described. Wood on wood, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from all directions at once. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. "Options?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We leave the way we came, quickly and respectfully, or we try to negotiate, which I don't recommend because I don't speak their language well enough, and I'm not sure they're in a negotiating mood. We can't leave without the hikers." "The hikers are gone, Ranger Torres. They're in the loop now, in the space between spaces. We can't reach them from here." "Then how do we get them back?" Dave looked at her, and his expression was sympathetic but firm. "We don't. They have to find their own way out. That's how it works. The Sinulkai take people into their territory, into the folded space they control. Time moves differently there. Space doesn't follow our rules. The hikers might be gone for an hour or a day or a week from our perspective, but from theirs it could be minutes or months. When the Sinulkai decide to release them, if they decide to release them, they'll walk out like nothing happened. That's not acceptable. It's not about acceptable, it's about what is." The shapes were getting closer now, close enough that Evelyn could see details. They weren't made of sticks exactly. They were sticks, somehow animated, somehow given form and purpose, bundles of branches woven together in roughly humanoid shapes, with eyes that glowed faintly in the shadows and mouths that shouldn't exist but did, opening and closing soundlessly. "We need to go," Marcus said urgently. "Right now." Evelyn made a decision she knew she'd second-guess for the rest of her career. "Everybody back to the trail. Move quickly. Don't run. Don't look directly at them." They started walking, and the stick figures followed, maintaining their distance but clearly hurting them, guiding them back toward the trail. The tapping intensified, surrounding them, creating a rhythm that felt almost like language. They were almost to the trail when Sarah stopped suddenly. "Wait, do you hear that?" Evelyn listened. Underneath the tapping, she could hear voices, human voices, calling for help. "That's Tyler." Sarah started toward the sound. "No." Dave grabbed her arm. "That's not Tyler. That's them, mimicking human voices. It's a trap." "But what if it's really him?" "It's not. Trust me." The voices got louder, more desperate. "Help us, please. We're stuck. We can't get out." It sounded exactly like Tyler, exactly like someone in genuine distress. Every instinct Evelyn had trained for years was screaming at her to respond, to help, to rescue. But Dave's grip on her arm tightened. "That's not him. Keep walking." They reached the trail and started downhill, moving fast now. The voices followed them, staying just out of sight, calling and pleading and begging. The stick figures paralleled them through the trees, always visible in peripheral vision, never quite solid enough to photograph. They hiked for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. And then suddenly the forest changed. The fog lifted completely. The oppressive silence broke, replaced by normal forest sounds. Birds, wind, the distant rush of water. The stick figures vanished as if they'd never been there. And Evelyn's radio crackled back to life. "Unit 7, this is New Harlem Base. You dropped off our scopes for about 40 minutes. What's your status?" Evelyn keyed the radio with shaking hands. "Base, we're okay. We're hiking out. The missing hikers were not at their campsite. We found their equipment but no sign of them." "Copy. We've had a development here. 4 hikers just walked into the ranger station about 10 minutes ago. A Tyler Reeves and 3 others. They claim they just hiked out from Cascade Pass Trail. They seem confused and disoriented, but physically fine." Evelyn stopped walking. "Say that again?" "The missing hikers. They're here. They showed up on their own while you were searching for them." The team exchanged looks. Dave smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. "Told you, the Sinulkai released them. Probably decided they'd learned their lesson." "What lesson?" Sarah asked. "Respect, maybe. Humility. Understanding that there are places humans don't control, no matter how many trails we build or maps we draw." They continued hiking down, and Evelyn found herself thinking about what Dave had said, about old places and old things, about the fact that humans had been in these mountains for maybe 10,000 years, but the mountains themselves had been here for 50 million. About the arrogance of thinking you could map and measure and understand everything just because you could see it and walk through it. By the time they reached the trailhead, it was late afternoon. The fog had burned off completely, and the mountains were visible now in their full glory. White peaks against blue sky, beautiful and indifferent to human concerns. Tyler and his friends were waiting at the ranger station, wrapped in emergency blankets and drinking hot coffee. They looked exhausted but unharmed. When Evelyn approached, Tyler stood up quickly. "Ranger Torres, thank you for coming to help us. We figured it out eventually." "Figured what out?" "How to leave. We stopped trying to fight it, stopped trying to understand it. We just asked whatever was keeping us there to let us go. Promised we'd respect the forest, that we'd remember this experience, and then we were able to hike out. Took maybe 20 minutes and we were at the trailhead." "Did you see anything while you were trapped? Hear anything unusual?" Tyler exchanged glances with his friends. "We saw some things, heard some things, but honestly, the whole experience is already getting fuzzy in my memory, like a dream that fades when you wake up. We were there for hours, but also maybe we weren't. Time didn't work right." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I'm going to need all 4 of you to come to the medical center for evaluation. Standard procedure for any backcountry incident, and we'll need formal statements about what happened." "Of course, whatever you need." But Evelyn knew that whatever they wrote in their statements, whatever they remembered, it wouldn't capture what really happened out there. You couldn't put that in a report, couldn't quantify it, or explain it, or file it away in a neat category. Some things existed outside the official record. Some things were real even when they didn't make sense. Minko, 3 weeks later, Evelyn was reviewing incident reports when she came across a note from Bill Crawford. It was brief, handwritten, attached to the file from the Cascade Pass incident. 4 hikers trapped in spatial loop at Pelton Basin. All emerged unharmed after approximately 6 hours. Medical evaluation showed no physical effects beyond normal fatigue and mild dehydration. Hikers' report memory of events is unclear and fading rapidly. Psychological evaluation recommended but declined by all parties. No further action required. Case closed. Below that, in smaller writing, Evelyn, good work up there. You kept your head, trusted your team, and everyone came home safe. That's what matters. The mountains keep their secrets. We just try to help people navigate around them. Bill. Evelyn filed the report and went back to her regular duties. But she found herself thinking about that day often. About the stick figures in the fog. About the tapping sounds in the looping trail. About Dave's words regarding old places and old things. She'd been a ranger for 4 months when the Cascade Pass incident happened. It had taught her something they didn't cover in training. Something she suspected most rangers never learned no matter how many years they served. The wilderness wasn't empty. It wasn't just trees and rocks and animals waiting for humans to arrive and give them meaning. The wilderness was full of history and mystery and things that had their own reasons for being there. Reasons that had nothing to do with humans and our trails and our maps and our desperate need to understand everything. Sometimes the best thing you could do was recognize your limits, show respect, ask permission, and when something made it clear you weren't welcome, have the wisdom to leave. That was the real lesson of the North Cascades. Not that the wilderness was dangerous, everyone knew that, but that the wilderness was sovereign, ancient, and patient. It had been here before humans arrived. It would be here long after humans were gone. And in certain places, at certain times, it reminded you of that fact in ways you couldn't ignore. Evelyn never hiked the Cascade Pass Trail again, though she continued working at North Cascades for 3 more years. When visitors asked about that trail, she recommended it readily. It was beautiful, well-maintained, safe for experienced hikers. But she always added one note of caution, delivered lightly enough that most people didn't think too much about it. Stay on the marked trail. Don't follow anything you hear or see in the trees. And if you feel like you're going in circles, stop and ask permission to leave. You'd be surprised how often that works. Most visitors laughed or nodded politely, assuming she was being metaphorical or poetic. A few understood. Those were the ones who'd spent enough time in deep wilderness to know that the world was stranger and older than maps could capture. Those were the ones who came back from their hikes with stories they weren't quite sure how to tell, about experiences that didn't quite fit into normal categories. Those were the ones who listened when the mountains spoke, and who had the wisdom to speak back. Tyler Reeves returned to his software engineering job in Seattle and tried to forget about what happened at Cascade Pass. For the first few weeks, he was largely successful. The memory faded exactly as he'd told Ranger Torres it would, like a dream losing definition upon waking, until only fragments remained. But sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd remember the sensation of walking downhill for hours and ending up exactly where he started. He'd remember the tapping sounds in the forest, rhythmic and purposeful. He'd remember the shapes made of sticks and shadow circling closer. And he'd remember the moment when they'd finally stopped fighting, when Madison had said, "Maybe we should ask," and they'd all thought she was crazy, but tried it anyway. When they'd stood in that clearing and spoken out loud to something they couldn't see, asking respectfully to be released, promising to remember. The way the forest had suddenly felt different after that. The way the oppressive weight had lifted. The way the trail had simply been there, straightforward and clear, leading them out. He never told anyone outside his close friend group about that part. It sounded too ridiculous, too much like something from a fantasy novel. But he remembered it clearly, more clearly than anything else from that day. 3 months after the incident, Tyler received a package in the mail. No return address, just his name and address written in careful handwriting. Inside was a small wooden carving, a figure made from twisted branches about 6 inches tall, roughly humanoid but clearly not human. And a note, written on plain paper. Remember your promise. Respect the old places. They remember you too. Tyler put the carving on his bookshelf, where it sat among his fantasy novels and hiking guidebooks. Visitors occasionally asked about it, and he'd say it was a souvenir from a hiking trip, which was true in its way. But late at night, when he looked at it in the dim light from his bedroom, he could swear it moved sometimes, just slightly, just enough to remind him that some promises weren't metaphorical. Some promises were real, and breaking them had consequences. Tyler kept his promise. He never went back to the North Cascades, and when he hiked in other wilderness areas, which he continued to do, because the mountains were still beautiful and still worth visiting, he always paused at trailheads, always showed respect, always asked permission, even if just silently in his own mind, and always stayed on the marked trail. Because he'd learned what the rangers had learned, what the indigenous peoples had known for thousands of years. The wilderness had rules. Not human rules, not rules you could write down in a guidebook, but rules nonetheless. Follow them, and the mountains would let you pass through safely, would share their beauty and their peace. Break them, and the mountains would teach you lessons you'd never forget. Tyler had learned his lesson. He carried it with him every day, in every choice he made about where to go and how to behave when he got there. The wilderness was sovereign. The wilderness was patient, and the wilderness never forgot. Neither would he. Location: Glacier National Park, Montana. Date: February 18, 2023. Brandon Keller had 2 weeks left before retirement, and he planned to spend most of them behind a desk. 28 years with the National Park Service, the last 15 at Glacier, and he'd earned the right to coast through his final days doing paperwork and handing off responsibilities to younger rangers who still had the energy for winter rescues and bear management and the endless, exhausting theater of pretending to care about tourists who ignored every warning sign. The call came in at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday in February, when the temperature was already dropping toward the forecast low of -18 Fahrenheit. 4 cross-country skiers, experienced backcountry types, had missed their check-in time at the Lake McDonald Ranger Station. They'd filed a backcountry permit for a 3-day traverse from Logan Pass to Apgar, a route that was technically open year-round, but only attempted by people who knew what they were doing. Or thought they did. The group's emergency contact, a wife in Kalispell, had called the main office when her husband didn't answer his satellite phone. That wasn't unusual. Satellite phones were temperamental in the mountains, and the forecast called for heavy cloud cover. But protocol was protocol. Someone had to go check. Brandon looked at the weather radar on his computer screen. A storm system moving in from the northwest, predicted to arrive by nightfall. Heavy snow, high winds, visibility near zero. The kind of storm that made search and rescue a suicide mission. If they were going to find these skiers, it had to be now. "I'll take it," he told Sarah, the district ranger. She was half his age and had been trying to mother him ever since he'd announced his retirement. "Solo?" "Jenkins is out with the flu. Morrison's on the east side dealing with a snowmobile accident. Everyone else is rookies." Brandon pulled on his parka. "I've done this route 100 times. I'll snowshoe in, find their camp, confirm they're okay, and be back before the storm hits." "Brandon, if you're not back by 1900 hours, I'm sending someone after you." "Fair enough." He loaded his pack with the usual winter rescue gear: GPS, radio, first aid kit, emergency bivvy, water, high-calorie food, headlamp with extra batteries, fire starter, his personal additions, a flask of whiskey that Sarah didn't know about, and a .44 Magnum revolver that she did. Grizzlies were hibernating, but mountain lions weren't, and wounded moose could be more dangerous than any predator. Brandon had learned a long time ago that the wilderness wasn't spiritual or mystical or any of the other things tourists like to project onto it. It was a collection of physical systems, weather, geology, biology, that followed predictable rules. Respect those rules, prepare for contingencies, and you'd be fine. Ignore them and the mountain would kill you with the same indifference it showed to everything else. He'd never lost anyone on his watch, not in 28 years. He intended to keep that record intact for 2 more weeks. The drive to the Logan Pass trailhead took 40 minutes on snow-packed roads. Brandon parked beside a white Subaru Outback with Colorado plates, the skier's vehicle according to the permit. He checked inside. Empty except for a duffel bag on the back seat. No signs of distress. He strapped on his snowshoes and started up the trail. The forest in winter was a different place than summer tourists saw. The boardwalks and interpretive signs were buried under 6 feet of snow. The Jing Sea that drew millions of visitors each year, glacier-carved valleys, alpine meadows, crystalline lakes, was hidden beneath a blank white shroud. Everything was reduced to essentials: trees, snow, sky. Navigation required constant attention to topography, to the subtle ways ridges and valleys shaped the wind and light. Brandon moved at a steady pace, the rhythm of snowshoeing automatic after decades. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under his shoes and the occasional crack of a tree branch shedding ice. No birds, no wind yet. The forest held that peculiar winter silence, the sound of a world locked in cold sleep. He'd been hiking for 90 minutes when he found the first sign. A ski track leaving the main trail, heading northeast toward the ridgeline. That was wrong. The permit specified they'd be following the valley route, staying below tree line where there was shelter from wind and easier navigation. Going up to the ridge in February was asking for trouble. Exposed to weather, avalanche danger, no protection. Brandon followed the tracks. Maybe they'd spotted something interesting. A good viewpoint, wildlife, and detoured briefly. But the tracks continued, climbing steadily, leading away from the safe route and toward terrain that became increasingly dangerous. After another 30 minutes, he found the camp, or what was left of it. The tent was still standing, but one wall had been shredded, not ripped by wind, but torn, with the fabric hanging in strips. The contents were scattered, sleeping bags pulled outside and scattered across the snow, a camp stove overturned, food bags ripped open with the contents strewn everywhere. It looked like an animal attack, a bear maybe. Except bears were hibernating, and even if one had woken early, this wasn't bear behavior. Bears were destructive but methodical. This looked frantic, panicked. Brandon keyed his radio. "Base, this is Keller. I found the skiers' camp. It's been destroyed. No sign of the occupants. I'm seeing 4 sets of tracks leading northeast from the site moving fast. Recommend we escalate this to full search and rescue." Static answered him. He tried again. Nothing. He checked the unit. Battery full, antenna intact. The mountains could create dead zones where radio signals couldn't reach, but he'd used his radio from this area before without problems. He'd have to continue the search alone and report when he got back to range. Brandon examined the tracks leaving the camp. 4 sets, as the permit indicated. 2 men, 2 women based on boot sizes. But the spacing was wrong. These weren't the measured strides of experienced skiers. These were running strides, the distance between prints suggesting panic, fleeing something, and overlaying those tracks. Something else. Brandon crouched, studying the snow. The prints were hard to identify, almost human-shaped, but elongated. The toes too long, and the spacing suggested something moving on 2 legs, but with a stride length that shouldn't be possible. Whatever made these tracks had legs 7, maybe 8 feet long. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of the revolver on his hip. 28 years in wilderness service, and Brandon had seen a lot. Grizzly tracks, wolf tracks, mountain lion tracks. He'd once found the remains of an elk that had been taken down by a pack of wolves, the snow painted red in a 30-foot radius. Nature was brutal, but it followed rules. Predators killed for food, for territory, for survival. Not for sport, not for malice. These tracks felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Brandon checked his watch. 4:47 p.m. Sunset was at 5:32. The storm was forecast to arrive around 7. He had maybe 2 hours before conditions became lethal. He followed the tracks. They led him up toward the ridgeline, through stands of subalpine fir and whitebark pine. The temperature was dropping fast. His breath came in thick clouds now, and ice was forming on his beard. His fingers were starting to go numb inside his gloves despite the chemical hand warmers. The tracks continued for another mile before he found the first body. It was one of the men, maybe 35 years old, wearing a bright yellow ski jacket. He was lying face down in the snow. Brandon approached carefully, checking for signs of life even though he already knew. The body was frozen. had been dead for hours. He turned it over as gently as he could. The man's face was intact, eyes wide and frozen in an expression Brandon had seen before on avalanche victims. That particular look of someone who died understanding exactly what was happening to them. But the body below the neck was wrong. The jacket had been torn open, and the chest cavity was hollow. Ribs spread like the petals of a flower. Everything inside, heart, lungs, organs, gone. Not cut, not torn by claws. Eaten. The edges of the wound showed bite marks. Human bite marks. Brandon stood quickly, his hand moving to the revolver without conscious thought. He'd investigated deaths in the park before. Falls, hypothermia, animal attacks, one suicide. But this wasn't any of those. This was something else. Something impossible. He forced himself to think procedurally. There were 3 other skiers unaccounted for. They might still be alive. He needed to find them. But a voice in the back of his mind, the part that still remembered being a child who was afraid of the dark, was screaming at him to run. The tracks continued up the ridge. Brandon followed, moving faster now, the snowshoes kicking up powder with each step. The light was fading, the sun dropping behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the snow. He found the second body half a mile later. One of the women, early 20s. She'd made it farther than the man, but not far enough. The body was in the same condition. Chest cavity hollow, organs gone, frozen blood staining the snow in a dark halo. But this one showed defensive wounds. Her hands were torn, fingers missing. She'd tried to fight. Brandon's radio crackled suddenly. Not static, something else. A voice distant and distorted. "So hungry. Please. Help us." He grabbed the radio. "This is Ranger Keller. Identify yourself." "Can't stop. So hungry. It won't stop." The voice cut off. Brandon tried to respond but got only silence. He checked the GPS. The coordinates showed he was 3 miles from the nearest ranger station, deep in terrain where radio communication should be impossible. But he'd heard something. Someone was alive out here. The last 2 tracks split at a rock outcrop. One set continued up toward the ridgeline. The other turned sharply and headed downslope, toward a thick stand of trees. Brandon made a decision. He followed the downslope tracks. If someone was trying to find shelter, they'd head for the trees. The forest here was older. The trees, massive Douglas firs that had somehow survived fire and wind for centuries. The canopy blocked what little light remained, plunging the forest floor into premature darkness. Brandon pulled out his headlamp and switched it on. The beam cut through the gloom, creating a tunnel of light in the darkness. That's when he heard it. Crying. Quiet, muffled, coming from somewhere ahead. "Park Service," Brandon called out. "If you can hear me, make noise. I'm here to help." The crying stopped. Then a voice, female, shaking with cold and fear. "Help me, please. It killed them. It killed them all." Brandon moved toward the voice, pushing through deep snow between the trees. His light found her. One of the women from the permit, maybe 40 years old, pressed against the trunk of a massive fir. She was in the late stages of hypothermia, shivering violently, pupils dilated, speech slurred. Her jacket was torn, and her left arm hung at a wrong angle. Broken. "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Keller. I'm going to get you out of here." He unslung his pack, pulled out the emergency bivvy, a reflective sleeping bag designed to retain heat. "What's your name?" Jessica Torres." Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. "It killed them. David and Morgan and Chris. It ate them." "What attacked you? A bear? Mountain lion?" "No." Jessica's eyes were unfocused, staring at something Brandon couldn't see. Not an animal. It was Chris. But it wasn't Chris anymore. His eyes were wrong, and he was so hungry. He kept saying he was so hungry. Brandon wrapped the bivvy around her, trying to raise her core temperature. Hypothermia caused hallucinations, confusion, false memories. She'd been through trauma. watched her friends die, and her brain was trying to make sense of it with whatever explanations it could construct. "Jessica, I need you to focus. Where's the fourth person from your group?" He ran. When Chris started changing. We all ran, but Chris caught David first and then Morgan, and I hid, but I could hear them screaming, and she grabbed Brandon's jacket with her good hand. "He's still out there. Chris is still out there. And he's still hungry." A branch snapped behind them. Brandon turned, his hand moving to the revolver. The headlamp beam swept across trees, snow, shadows. Nothing. He waited, every sense straining. Then he heard it. Breathing. Heavy, labored, but wrong somehow. Too wet. Like someone breathing through a mouthful of water. "Is someone there?" Brandon called out. "This is the Park Service. Identify yourself." The breathing stopped. A voice answered, male, coming from the darkness beyond his light. Brandon Keller, 28 years Park Service, 15 at Glacier, 2 weeks until retirement. Brandon's blood went ice cold. "How do you know that?" "I know everything now. I can hear the forest, hear the animals sleeping in their dens, hear your heart beating, hear your thoughts if I listen hard enough." The voice moved, circling them. "I'm so hungry, Brandon, hungrier than I've ever been, and no matter how much I eat, it's never enough." Brandon drew the revolver, tracking the sound. "Chris Torres, if that's you, I need you to step into the light. You're hypothermic. You're confused. Let me help you." Laughter echoed through the trees, high and sharp and utterly wrong. "You can't help me. No one can help me. I'm changing, getting stronger, getting faster. I can smell you from half a mile away. Smell the fear on you. It smells delicious." Something moved at the edge of the light. Brandon fired. The gunshot was deafening in the winter silence. The flash from the muzzle lit up the forest for a brief instant, and in that instant Brandon saw it. A man-shaped thing, too tall, too thin, with arms that hung to its knees and skin pulled tight over bones that jutted at wrong angles. The face was human, or had been. Now it was elongated, the jaw distended, mouth full of teeth that were too sharp, too many. The eyes reflected the light like an animal's, but behind that reflection was something intelligent, something that knew what it had become and reveled in it. The bullet hit it in the chest. The thing staggered backward, looked down at the wound, then looked back up at Brandon, and smiled. "Iron and lead won't stop me. Nothing stops me. I'm hunger itself now. I'm what lives in the spaces between the trees, what waits in the cold and the dark." It took a step forward. "I'm going to eat you slowly, Ranger Keller. I'm going to make it last." Brandon fired again and again, each shot hitting center mass. The thing kept coming. He grabbed Jessica, hauled her to her feet. "Run, now." "I can't. Run!" They ran. Brandon's training kicked in even as his mind tried to reject what he'd just seen. Get distance. Find shelter. Reassess. He pulled Jessica along, half carrying her, moving downslope where the trees thinned and he could see farther. Behind them, that wet breathing grew closer. The thing that had been Chris Torres was following, taking its time, playing. Jessica stumbled, nearly fell. Brandon caught her, kept moving. "Stay with me. We're going to make it out of this." "You don't understand." Jessica's voice was flat, emotionless, the detachment of severe hypothermia setting in. Chris was the first, but it's spreading. Morgan started feeling it too before Chris killed her. She said she could feel something growing inside her. Said she was so hungry she wanted to bite David. Bite him and taste him, and that's not real. That's shock and cold talking. Then explain what you just shot. Brandon had no answer. They broke out of the tree line into open snowfield. The storm was arriving. Brandon could see the clouds rolling in from the northwest, could feel the temperature dropping even further, could feel the first kiss of snow starting to fall. They were 3 miles from any shelter, with a blizzard bearing down and something hunting them that shouldn't exist. 2 weeks until retirement. The breathing was closer now. Brandon turned, bringing up the revolver. The thing emerged from the trees, moving with an awful grace. In the growing darkness, it looked even less human. The proportions wrong, the movements fluid in ways that made Brandon's eyes hurt to track. "I can smell your exhaustion, Brandon." The voice was still recognizably human, but deeper now, resonant. "I can hear your heart struggling. You're old, weak, but you'll taste good. You'll fill the emptiness for maybe an hour, maybe 2. Brandon aimed carefully and fired his last 3 rounds. The thing twitched with each impact but didn't slow down. It was maybe 30 feet away now, then 20. Brandon dropped the useless gun and did the only thing he could think of. He pulled out his survival lighter and the small container of fire starter gel from his pack. He squeezed the entire tube onto a dead tree stump protruding from the snow, flicked the lighter, and the gel caught with a whoosh of flame. The thing stopped, stared at the fire. For the first time, something like fear crossed its distorted features. "Fire," Brandon said, understanding. "You're afraid of fire." The thing's lips pulled back, showing all those impossible teeth. "Fire is life. Fire is warmth. I'm cold now. Always cold. The hunger burns, but it doesn't warm. Fire reminds me of what I lost." It circled them, staying well back from the small flame. Brandon grabbed a branch, lit the end, created a makeshift torch. It wasn't much. The branch was damp, burning poorly, but it was something. "Jessica, take this." He handed her the torch. "Keep it between you and that thing. I'm going to try the radio again." He pulled out the radio, praying for a signal. Static greeted him, then that same distorted voice from before. "Please, help. So hungry." "Who is this?" Brandon demanded. The thing in the shadows laughed. "That's the other one, your 4th skier. David. He's farther up the mountain. He lasted longer than the rest, ran faster, got away before I could finish him. But the hunger got him anyway. It always does. Once it's inside you, once you taste that first bite of human flesh, there's no going back. You just get hungrier and hungrier until you're not human anymore. Until you're like me." Brandon stared at the thing that had been Chris Torres. "What happened to you?" 3 days ago, we got lost in a whiteout. Couldn't find our camp. Couldn't see more than 10 feet. We dug a snow cave, planned to wait it out. But the temperature dropped to 30 below. We didn't have enough food. By the 2nd day, we were all starting to make bad decisions. David suggested. The thing paused, something like human emotion flickering across its face. He suggested we draw straws for who would contribute, for survival. "You ate human flesh," Brandon said quietly. "I had to. We were going to die. But the moment I took that first bite..." The thing shuddered, and Brandon saw genuine horror in its eyes. "The moment I tasted it, something changed. Inside me, in my thoughts. I became so hungry, and the more I ate, the hungrier I got. The others tried to stop me, but I was already stronger, faster, changing. And then they started changing too. Once you break that law, once you consume human flesh in the wild, something takes notice, something old, something that's been waiting in these mountains since before humans came here." Brandon knew the stories. He dismissed them as superstition, folk tales that the local indigenous peoples told to keep people away from dangerous areas. The Wendigo, a spirit of hunger, of cold, of winter's cruelty. According to legend, anyone who resorted to cannibalism in the wilderness would be possessed by insatiable hunger, would transform into a monster that could never be satisfied. Stories. Just stories. Except one of those stories was standing 20 feet away, wearing a dead man's face. The radio crackled again. "Help, I'm at the ridge, can't control it, please kill me before..." The transmission cut off with a sound that might have been screaming or might have been laughter. The thing, Chris, tilted its head. "David won't last much longer. The transformation is painful. It hurts to become what we are. Your skin stretches, your bones grow, your insides hollow out because you don't need them anymore. All you need is hunger, It's beautiful and terrible, and I want you to feel it too, Brandon. I want you to understand. It took a step forward. The torch in Jessica's hand flickered. The branch nearly burned through. Brandon looked around desperately. They were in an exposed snowfield, miles from help, with a blizzard arriving and two creatures that had once been human hunting them. The fire wouldn't last. Jessica was minutes away from complete system shutdown from hypothermia, and Brandon was 63 years old with arthritic knees and no bullets left. 2 weeks until retirement. He'd spent 28 years believing the wilderness was just physics and biology. Predictable. Rational. Now the mountain was teaching him a final lesson. There were older rules than the ones he knew. Darker principles. And they didn't care about his experience or his skepticism or his carefully maintained safety record. The torch went out. Jessica made a small sound of despair. The thing smiled and started walking toward them. Brandon grabbed the fire starter gel container, still a few drops left, squeezed it onto his glove, and flicked his lighter. The gel caught, and his glove burst into flame. He had maybe 10 seconds before the fire burned through to his skin. He ran at the thing. It didn't expect that. Didn't expect prey to attack. Brandon slammed into it, his burning hand connecting with its face. The thing shrieked, a sound that was part human scream and part something else entirely, and staggered backward, clawing at its face where the gel burned. Brandon tackled it, using his body weight to drive it down into the snow. "Jessica, run!" he shouted. "Follow the valley! Find shelter!" He didn't know if she could hear him, didn't know if she could move. He focused on keeping the thing pinned, keeping the fire pressed against it. The smell was horrific. Burning hair, burning flesh, something chemical and wrong underneath. The thing bucked, stronger than anything human should be. It threw Brandon off, sent him sliding across the snow. He scrambled to his feet, shaking off the glove. His hand underneath was burned, but not badly. The thing was on its feet too, half its face blackened, one eye socket empty and smoking. It should have been dead, should have been in shock. Instead, it was angry. "You're going to suffer for that," it hissed. "I'm going to keep you alive for hours while I eat you piece by piece." Brandon ran. Not toward the valley where he'd sent Jessica. Not downslope toward safety. He ran upslope, toward the ridge. Toward where the fourth skier, David, was presumably transforming into another one of these things. It was suicidal. Irrational. But Brandon had figured something out in that moment of burning the creature. Chris Torres had said the transformation hurt. That becoming what they were was painful, which meant they weren't invincible. They could feel pain, could be hurt, could be killed, maybe, if Brandon could figure out how. The slope was steep, the snow deep. Brandon's lungs burned in the frigid air. Behind him, he could hear the thing pursuing faster than he was, closing the distance. He didn't look back, just climbed. The radio crackled one more time. "Ridge, hurry, can't, much longer." Brandon crested the ridge and found David. The man was on his knees in the snow, illuminated by the last rays of sunset breaking through the storm clouds. He was partway through the transformation. Bones protruding at strange angles through his skin, his jaw distended, hands elongated into claws. But his eyes were still human, still aware. "Please," David gasped. "Before I lose myself completely, before I become like Chris, please." Brandon approached slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Fire. It's the only thing. We tried to stop the hunger with cold. With starvation, but it only made it worse. Fire burns it out, kills the spirit before it completes the possession. But you have to do it while there's still something human left. Once the transformation is complete, nothing can stop us." Behind Brandon, the sound of Chris climbing the slope grew louder. "I don't have any way to start a large enough fire," Brandon said. David laughed, a wet and broken sound. "Yes, you do. The storm. It's carrying lightning. I've been watching the clouds. If you can get Chris up here on this exposed ridge when the storm hits." Understanding dawned. "You want me to use him as a lightning rod?" We're taller than human now, highly conductive. The spirit inside us. It's made of hunger, and hunger is empty, and emptiness conducts electricity like nothing else. If the lightning hits him, it'll kill the Wendigo spirit. Kill it, and the body dies. The hunger dies. Chris crested the ridge, moving in that awful fluid way. He looked between Brandon and David, his burned face twisted into something like betrayal. "Brother," he said to David, "are you helping the prey? I'm not your brother anymore. I'm just what's left." David stood on shaking legs, his elongated arms hanging almost to his knees. "And I'm tired of being hungry." He ran at Chris. The two things collided with an impact that sent up a spray of snow. They grappled, rolling across the ridge, inhuman and terrible. Brandon backed away, watching the sky. The storm clouds were directly overhead now, dark and massive, pregnant with electricity. He could feel the static in the air, making his hair stand up. The creatures fought with savage intensity. Chris stronger, but David more desperate. They were evenly matched, each trying to get jaws around the other's throat. The first lightning strike hit 50 yards away, a blinding flash and deafening crack. The second hit 30 yards away. The storm was directly over them. Brandon pulled out his radio. He had one last idea. He extended the antenna as far as it would go and held it up, creating a better lightning target. Then he ran toward the fighting creatures and threw the radio between them. "Chris," he shouted, "you wanted to eat me? Come get me." The thing that had been Chris Torres looked up, saw Brandon, and smiled. It threw David aside and started walking toward Brandon, moving to all fours now, stalking like a wolf. Brandon backed toward the radio, keeping the creature's attention focused on him. 5 feet, 4 feet, 3. The lightning struck. The bolt hit the radio antenna and coursed through the device with millions of volts. The charge found the nearest conductor, Chris Torres's elongated body, and the thing lit up like a light bulb. Brandon was thrown backward by the concussion, landing hard in the snow, temporarily blinded. When his vision cleared, Chris was lying motionless. The body was smoking, the skin blackened, but it looked more human now. Smaller. The bones had somehow contracted back to normal proportions. The thing was dead, and with it, the Wendigo spirit. David crawled over to his friend's body, touched it gently. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for ending it." "You're still infected," Brandon said, standing on shaky legs. "I need to..." "I know." David looked at him, and Brandon saw tears on his distorted face. "Will you tell my wife what happened? The truth? No one will believe it. Tell her anyway. Tell her I loved her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her the mountain takes what it takes. And sometimes what it takes is everything." Before Brandon could respond, David stood and walked to the highest point of the ridge. He spread his arms wide, offering himself to the storm. The second strike hit 30 seconds later. When it was over, Brandon stood alone on the ridge with two bodies that were quickly being buried by the falling snow. He looked at them for a long moment, then started the long walk back down the mountain. Jessica Torres survived. Brandon found her at the tree line, barely conscious but alive. He got her into his emergency bivvy, started a small fire with the last of his gel starter, and kept her warm until the storm passed and a helicopter could extract them at dawn. The official report listed the deaths as exposure and hypothermia, complicated by trauma and disorientation. 3 bodies recovered, causes of death consistent with environmental exposure in extreme winter conditions. The physical evidence supported this conclusion. The cold had done its work, had erased the teeth marks and the impossible wounds. By the time the recovery team reached the site, there was nothing to suggest anything but a tragic accident. Brandon wrote the report himself. He knew no one would believe the truth. Hell, if he hadn't seen it himself, he wouldn't have believed it. The wilderness was supposed to follow predictable rules, but there were older rules, he'd learned. Rules that predated science, that existed in the spaces between what humans understood and what they feared. Jessica remembered nothing after Brandon found her. Hypothermia-induced amnesia, the doctors said. A blessing, really. She'd lost her husband and 3 friends to the mountain. She didn't need to know what they'd become in their final hours. Brandon took his retirement 2 weeks later, as planned. He moved to Florida, as far from winter and mountains and the hungry dark as he could get. He didn't go camping anymore, didn't go hiking, stayed in places where civilization was thick and the walls were strong and nothing could come scratching at his door in the night. But sometimes he still heard it, that wet, labored breathing, that voice saying, "I'm so hungry." Usually in dreams, but occasionally in the space between sleep and waking, in that moment when the mind is most vulnerable to things that live in the dark. And Brandon would turn on every light in his house and wait for dawn, remembering a lesson learned too late. The wilderness wasn't just physics and biology. It was also hunger. It was also cold. It was also the terrible price of survival when all other options are exhausted. The mountain keeps its secrets, except for the ones it teaches you, and those you carry forever. Sabir. Epilogue. Park Service Incident Report Addendum. Filed 2024. Recovered from Ranger Brandon Keller's personal effects following his death, aged 64, in his home in Tallahassee, Florida. Cause of death: natural causes, cardiac arrest. Found in a locked filing cabinet with instructions to be forwarded to Glacier National Park following his death. To whoever reads this. I'm writing this 1 year after the Torres incident, and I've had time to do research. Real research, not just the folklore I dismissed for 28 years. The Wendigo legend isn't unique to one tribe or one region. It appears across all the Algonquian peoples, Ojibwe, Cree, Innu, Naskapi, with consistent details. A spirit of hunger that possesses those who consume human flesh in the wild, makes them into monsters that can never be satisfied. But here's what the anthropologists miss. It's not just a cautionary tale. It's a warning about a real phenomenon. Indigenous peoples observed something real, something that happened to people who broke that ultimate taboo of survival, and they encoded the knowledge of how to fight it into stories. Fire. That's the answer. The Wendigo spirit is cold, hollow, empty. Fire fills the emptiness, burns out the possession before it completes, but only while there's still something human left to save. I'm writing this because it will happen again. People will get lost. People will get desperate. And some of them will make that terrible choice to survive, not knowing the price. When it happens, and it will, you need to know. Bullets don't work. Running doesn't work. The only thing that stops a Wendigo is fire, lightning, or destroying the body so completely there's nothing left for the spirit to inhabit. I spent 28 years not believing in things I couldn't measure or predict. The mountain taught me different. There are rules older than the ones we wrote down. Forces that don't care about our understanding. Respect them. Fear them. And for God's sake, if someone reports seeing things that match this description, don't dismiss it as hysteria or delusion. Some old stories are old because they're true. Brandon Keller, former park ranger, Glacier National Park, March 15th, 2024. Location: Olympic National Park, Washington. Date: November 7th, 2014. Hannah Reeves had stopped believing in monsters when she was 12 years old. That was the year she'd learned that the real horrors weren't the things hiding under beds or lurking in closets. They were the bruises hidden under long sleeves, the screams muffled by closed doors, the children who disappeared not into fairy tales, but into the cracks of a system that couldn't save them fast enough. She'd spent 15 years as a detective with Seattle PD, specializing in crimes against children, and in that time she'd seen enough genuine evil, human, mundane, explicable evil, to fill several lifetimes. The transfer to the National Park Service had been equal parts escape and surrender. After the Hendricks case, 3 children found in a basement after 2 years missing, alive but irreparably damaged, Hannah had looked at herself in the mirror one morning and realized she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't carry the weight of all those faces, all those files, all those children she'd found too late or not at all. So she'd taken her investigative experience, her forensic psychology background, and her shattered idealism to Olympic National Park, where the biggest problems were supposed to be lost hikers and occasional wildlife conflicts. A place where the forest was old and quiet and indifferent, where she could file reports about trail conditions and permit violations, and never again have to look at crime scene photos of things done to people too small to fight back. That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of rain and fog and ancient trees, of learning to breathe again, of slowly remembering what it felt like to sleep through the night without nightmares. Until today. Hannah stood outside the ranger station at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center, staring at the official missing persons report in her hand. The Morrison family, Michael 38, Rebecca 36, Sophia 8, Owen 5, had failed to return from a day hike 3 days ago. Their rental car was still in the parking lot. No one had heard from them. Search and rescue had been combing the trails for 72 hours, and now they'd been found. Found them about an hour ago, said Marcus Chen, the lead SAR coordinator, briefing her as they walked toward the command tent. Near the Hoh River Trail about 6 miles in. They were just sitting there, under a Sitka spruce, all 4 of them. Injuries? That's the weird part. No injuries, no signs of distress. They're just... Marcus paused, searching for words. They're confused, disoriented. The parents keep asking what year it is. Hannah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd seen confusion before. Hypothermia, dehydration, head trauma. But there was something in Marcus's tone that suggested this was different. What do you mean, what year? I mean, they keep insisting it's 2017. They think 3 years have passed. The father, Michael, he's got a journal. Dated entries spanning from November 2014 to November 2017. 3 years worth. 72 hours of entries, Hannah said. That's dissociative fugue, maybe, trauma response. They experienced something and their minds are creating a false timeline to cope. Maybe. Marcus didn't sound convinced. But Hannah, you need to see the kids. They reached the tent where the Morrison family was being evaluated by the park's medical team. Hannah ducked inside, and the cold feeling in her stomach intensified into something close to dread. The children sat on camp chairs wrapped in emergency blankets sipping hot chocolate. The boy, Owen, should have been 5 years old. The girl, Sophia, should have been 8. Hannah had looked at their photos in the missing persons file. She knew what they were supposed to look like. These children were not those children. Oh, they were the same children, clearly. The same faces, the same features. But Sophia was taller, significantly taller. Her baby fat was gone, her face more angular, her limbs longer with the gangly awkwardness of approaching adolescence. Her hair, which had been shoulder length in the photo, now hung halfway down her back. Owen was bigger too. Not as dramatically, but enough. The round toddler softness was gone from his face. He looked like a child of 7 or 8, not 5. That's impossible, Hannah whispered. The medical examiner, Dr. Sarah Kim, looked up from where she was checking Sophia's vital signs. You're telling me, according to every metric I can measure, bone density, dental development, even their heights and weights, these children have aged approximately 3 years. Sophia's gained 4 inches and 12 pounds. Owen's gained 3 inches and 8 pounds. Those are normal growth patterns for their respective ages. Except their respective ages should be 8 and 5, not 11 and 8. That can't be right. Run the tests again. I've run them 3 times. X-rays confirm it. Sophia has lost 2 baby teeth that were present in her dental records from 6 months ago, and has 2 adult teeth that shouldn't erupt for another 2 years. Owen's skeletal development is consistent with an 8-year-old, not a 5-year-old. Hannah's detective brain was screaming that there had to be a rational explanation. Mistaken identity, wrong children, some kind of elaborate hoax. But she'd seen the parents' faces, seen their driver's licenses, confirmed their identities through fingerprints. These were the Morrison family. These were the right children, who had somehow aged 3 years and 3 days. I need to interview them, Hannah said. The family sat together in the park conference room looking bewildered and frightened. Michael Morrison was a software engineer from Bellevue, his wife Rebecca a graphic designer. They looked like any of the thousands of families who visited Olympic every year. Outdoorsy, well-prepared, the kind of people who researched trails and packed extra snacks. They also looked exhausted, not the exhaustion of 3 days lost in the woods, the exhaustion of 3 years of accumulated stress and fear and survival. Hannah sat across from them, recording device on the table between them. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, I know you've been through a traumatic experience. I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Can you start from the beginning? You entered the park on November 4th? Yes, Michael said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming. We drove in that morning, checked into our campsite at the Hoh campground. It was Rebecca's birthday weekend. We wanted to do the Hoh River Trail, see the old growth forest. And you started the hike when? Around 10 a.m. We had permits, we had maps, we know how to hike safely. His eyes were pleading, desperate for her to understand. We did everything right. I'm sure you did. What happened next? Rebecca spoke up, her hand tight around Michael's. We hiked for maybe 3 hours. The kids were doing great. Owen was riding on Michael's shoulders part of the way. We stopped for lunch near the river right around the 2.5-mile mark. The Hall of Moss's turnoff, Michael added. We were going to take that trail on the way back, but after lunch we noticed Sophia had wandered off. Not far, she'd gone to look at something in the trees. Hannah glanced at Sophia, who sat very still, staring at her hands. What did you see, Sophia? The girl's voice was small but clear. A basket. There was a big basket sitting against a tree. It was really pretty, woven with patterns. I wanted to see it closer. And you went to look at it? I told her to come back, Rebecca said, her voice cracking. I called her name, but she just kept walking toward it like she couldn't hear me. And then Owen ran after her because he always follows his sister, and we both went after them. And then we were somewhere else. Michael finished. The forest changed. The trail was gone. Everything looked different, older. The trees were bigger, the undergrowth was thicker. And there was something. We felt like we were being watched. Hannah kept her voice level, professional. Can you describe what happened next? What happened next, according to Michael and Rebecca, was 3 years of nightmare. They'd tried to find their way back to the trail, but the forest seemed to shift around them. Landmarks disappeared. The river would be on their left, then suddenly on their right. They'd walk for hours and end up in the same clearing they'd started from. Their phones didn't work. Their GPS showed nonsense coordinates. Time felt wrong. Days seemed to stretch impossibly long. Nights came too fast or too slow. And they were never alone. Something was following us, Rebecca whispered. We never saw it clearly. Just glimpses. A figure moving between the trees. Tall, wrong proportions. And it had a basket on its back. A huge basket, big enough to fit a person. Sometimes we'd hear crying coming from it. Children crying. The kids heard it too, Michael said. They had nightmares. Sophia would wake up screaming about the basket lady. Owen would cry that he didn't want to go in the basket. Hannah looked at the children. Sophia met her eyes, and Hannah saw something there that made her stomach turn. Not the confusion of a traumatized 8-year-old, the haunted awareness of someone older. Someone who'd seen things no child should see. Sophia, Hannah said gently, can you tell me what you remember? The girl was quiet for a long moment. Then, it wasn't a nightmare. She was real. The basket lady. She would come close at night when Mom and Dad were asleep. Owen and I would stay awake, holding hands, pretending to sleep. She'd stand at the edge of our camp and watch. Sometimes she'd reach toward us with these really long fingers, but she never quite touched us. Why do you think that was? Because we could see her. Mom and Dad couldn't, not really. But Owen and I could. And Grandma Morrison told me once that you can't be taken if you know what's trying to take you. You have to not notice. You have to be unaware. The hair on the back of Hannah's neck stood up. She glanced at the parents, who looked shocked. Did your grandmother tell you about the basket lady? Sophia shook her head. No, but she told me stories about things in the forest. Coast Salish stories from her tribe. about women who carry baskets and steal children. She said they were warnings, that some warnings are really true. Hannah's detective instincts warred with something else, the part of her that had grown up hearing her own grandmother's stories, Korean folk tales about dokaebi and gumiho, entities that existed in the spaces between the modern world and the old one, stories she'd dismissed as superstition. "How did you get out?" she asked. "How did you find your way back?" "We didn't," Michael said. "Yesterday, or what felt like yesterday to us, we were in our camp. We'd been surviving on mushrooms and berries, fish from the river. 3 years. 3 years of living in that forest. And Sophia, she did something." All eyes turned to the girl. "I left an offering," Sophia said quietly, "like Grandma Morrison taught me, for the spirits. I wove a small basket from cedar bark the way she showed me once. I put some berries in it and left it at the base of the tree where we first saw the big basket. And I said thank you." "Thank you?" Hannah repeated. "Thank you for not taking us. Thank you for letting us go." Sophia's eyes were very old. "Because I realized she could have taken us any time, put us in her basket, but she didn't. She just kept us there, kept us in the forest where time was different. Maybe as a test, maybe as a game, I don't know. But when I left the offering and said thank you, the forest changed back. Suddenly we could see the trail again, and it was like no time had passed at all. Even though for us, 3 years, Rebecca finished, tears streaming down her face. We lived 3 years in that forest. 3 years. How is that possible? How can 3 days be 3 years? Hannah had no answer. She looked at her notes, at the rational, ordered bullet points she'd made, and felt them dissolving into meaninglessness. This wasn't dissociation. This wasn't trauma-induced delusion. The children had physically aged. The parents had detailed memories, consistent accounts, a journal with 3 years of dated entries. Something had happened to them. Something that bent the rules of time and space and reality. Something that lived in the oldest forest in North America and remembered when humans were still learning to name the things that scared them. Hannah spent the rest of the day interviewing each family member separately, documenting everything. She took photos of Michael's journal, page after page of entries describing their daily struggle to survive, notations about the weather, sketches of the thing that followed them. She documented every physical anomaly, the children's growth, the parents' beards and longer hair, the wear on their clothing that was inconsistent with 3 days of hiking. By evening, she had a file folder full of evidence that pointed to something impossible. She also had a splitting headache and a growing sense that she was standing on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. Something her detective's brain couldn't categorize or explain away. The Morrison family was being kept at the ranger station overnight for observation. Hannah told them she'd continue the investigation in the morning, then drove back to her cabin on the edge of the park. She needed to think. She needed to process. She needed to talk to someone who might understand. Hannah's grandmother lived in a retirement community in Olympia, an hour's drive from the park. At 8 p.m., Hannah called her. "Halmoni," she said, when the familiar voice answered. "It's Hannah. I need to ask you about the old stories." There was a pause. Then, "What happened, child?" Hannah told her everything. The Morrison family, the impossible aging, the basket ogress. Her grandmother listened without interrupting, and when Hannah finished, the old woman was quiet for a long moment. "You're not calling to ask if I believe them," she finally said. "You're calling because you believe them, and that scares you. I don't know what I believe. Everything I know about how the world works says this is impossible. The world is bigger than what you know, Hannah. You learned that in your old job, didn't you? That people are capable of terrible things you never imagined? That was different. That was human evil. Explainable. Is it? Is evil explainable? Is cruelty? Where does it come from, that capacity to hurt?" Her grandmother's voice was gentle. "You stopped believing in monsters because you thought humans were worse. But maybe they're the same thing. Maybe monsters are what we call the things we don't understand, whether they wear human faces or not. So you think the basket ogress is real?" I think there are places where the world is older, where it remembers things we've forgotten, and I think Olympic is one of those places. Those forests have been there for thousands of years. Thousands. The trees were ancient when my ancestors first came to this land. What do you think lives in a forest that old? What do you think watches from between the trees? Hannah felt cold despite her jacket. The children said they could see her because they were aware, that she couldn't take them if they knew she was there. That's the old wisdom. The ones who get taken are the ones who don't notice, who wander off the path without paying attention, who treat the forest like a park instead of a living thing with its own rules. Her grandmother paused. This family, they survived because the children remembered, because someone taught them to respect what they didn't understand. What do I do, Halmoni? I have to file a report. I have to explain what happened to them. You tell the truth. What you observed, what you documented. Let others draw their own conclusions. But Hannah, her voice turned serious. Don't go back into that forest alone. Not to investigate, not to prove anything. Some things aren't meant to be understood. Some things are meant to be respected from a distance. After hanging up, Hannah sat in her cabin and stared at the wall. Outside, the forest pressed close. Ancient spruces and cedars that had been growing since before Columbus, before the Vikings, before Rome. How many people had gone into those woods over the centuries? How many had come back changed or not at all? She thought about her years as a detective, about the case files and crime scene photos, about the neat categories she'd used to organize horror into understandable chunks. Abuse, neglect, predation, all terrible, all real, all explicable within the framework of human psychology and criminal behavior. But this was something else. This was a reminder that the world contained mysteries that couldn't be solved with forensic evidence and witness testimony. That there were still dark corners where the old rules applied, where things existed that science couldn't measure and courts couldn't prosecute. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen. Hannah, you need to come back to the station. Now. What happened? It's Sophia. She's asking for you. And she's saying things. You need to hear this. Legsindo. And when Hannah arrived at the ranger station, she found Sophia sitting alone in the conference room, drawing on a piece of paper. The girl looked up as Hannah entered, and again Hannah was struck by the wrongness of her eyes. Too knowing, too old. Hi, Sophia. Marcus said you wanted to talk to me. I needed to tell you the rest. The part I couldn't say in front of Mom and Dad. Hannah sat down slowly. What part? The part about Owen. Sophia's hand trembled as she pushed the drawing across the table. It showed two children, clearly Sophia and Owen, standing in front of a massive woven basket. The basket was on the back of a figure that was vaguely human-shaped, but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent at odd angles. And inside the basket, Hannah could see smaller figures, children, dozens of them. We weren't just in the forest for 3 years, Sophia said quietly. We were in her basket, for part of it. Maybe a few months, it's hard to remember, time was different inside. Hannah's mouth went dry. You were inside the basket? She took us one night. Mom and Dad were asleep, and Owen and I were pretending to be asleep, like we always did. But this time she reached down and picked us up so fast we couldn't scream. She put us in the basket. What was it like inside? Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Dark, and full of other kids. Some of them had been there a really long time. They couldn't remember their names anymore. There was a boy who said he'd been playing in the forest in 1962. He was still 7 years old. A girl who remembered cars with big fins and her mother's cat-eye glasses. They were all still children, but they'd been children for decades. How did you get out? Owen. Sophia wiped her eyes. Owen started singing. He was so scared, but he started singing the song Grandma Morrison taught us. A Salish song about children and safety, and the basket lady, she stopped walking. She opened the basket and looked at him, really looked at him, and she put us out. Just us. Not the other kids, just Owen and me. Because he sang the song. Because he remembered. Because someone had taught him the old words, the ones that meant something to her. She respected that. Sophia looked at her drawing. But the other kids are still in there. Hannah. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. She's been collecting them for so long. Hannah stared at the drawing, at the small faces visible in the woven basket. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know. Because you're going to wonder if you should go into the forest and try to find her. Try to save those kids. And you can't. Sophia's voice was fierce. You can't save them. They're already gone. They're hers now. All you can do is make sure no other kids get taken. Make sure people know to teach their children the old ways, the warnings, the songs that keep you safe. How do you know I was thinking about going after her? Because you're like my mom. You want to fix things. You want to save people. That's why you became a detective, right? To save kids. Sophia's two old eyes met hers. But you can't save these ones. The best thing you can do is make sure no one else needs saving. Hannah sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of those words. Sophia was right. She had been thinking about organizing a search, about going into the forest to find the basket ogress, about somehow rescuing the children trapped in that impossible basket. But how do you rescue someone from a place where time doesn't work? How do you fight something that exists outside the rules of reality? How do you save children who might have been taken 50 years ago, but are still 7 years old? What happens to you now? Hannah asked. You and Owen? You've aged 3 years. Your parents have 3 years of memories. How do you go back to normal life? We don't. Sophia said it matter-of-factly. We can't. Owen should be in kindergarten, but he looks like he should be in 2nd grade. I should be in 3rd grade, but I look like I should be in 6th. We have memories of 3 years that don't exist in the outside world. Mom and Dad have journal entries and experiences and time that no one else lived through. So what will you do? I don't know. Maybe we move somewhere no one knows us. Start over with our new ages. Maybe we tell people we were sick. That's why the kids grew so fast. Maybe we just adapt. She smiled sadly. Grandma Morrison says some families are marked by the old things. That we walk between the worlds now. Maybe that's us. Maybe that's what happens when you see something you're not supposed to see and live to tell about it. I endorse him. Hannah filed her report 3 days later. It was the strangest document she'd ever written. Part missing persons case, part witness testimony, part anthropological study of indigenous folklore. She documented the physical evidence, the inconsistencies, the impossible aging. She included photographs, medical records, excerpts from Michael's journal. She did not draw conclusions. She simply presented what she'd observed and let the readers make of it what they would. The official finding was recovered, unexplained circumstances. The Morrison family was released with recommendations for ongoing psychological care. The Park Service issued a quiet advisory about staying on marked trails and respecting indigenous cultural sites. And Hannah put in a request for a transfer. Not because she was afraid, not because she didn't believe, but because she'd learned something in those interviews, something her grandmother had tried to tell her years ago. There are different kinds of evil in the world. Some you can fight with handcuffs and court orders. Some you fight by teaching your children the old songs, by leaving offerings at the base of ancient trees, by remembering that the forest was here first and will be here long after humans are gone. You fight it by respecting what you can't understand. The transfer was denied. Budget constraints, they said. She would remain at Olympic for at least another year. Hannah accepted this with a strange mixture of resignation and something that might have been relief. Because someone needed to be here. Someone who knew. Someone who would take the reports of missing hikers seriously. Who would search not just for lost people, but for people who'd stumbled into places where time ran differently. Someone who would teach the new rangers the old warnings, even if they didn't believe. Especially if they didn't believe. She thought about the children still trapped in the basket Ogress's collection. Still 7 years old after decades. Still waiting for someone to sing them the right song. She thought about Sophia Morrison, aged 3 years and 3 days, marked forever by something the modern world had no name for. And she thought about her own grandmother's words, "The world is bigger than what you know." On November 14th, exactly 1 week after the Morrison family was found, Hannah hiked the Hoh River Trail. She went alone, against her grandmother's advice, against her own better judgment. She hiked past the Hall of Moss's turnoff, past the 2.5-mile marker where the Morrisons had stopped for lunch. She found the tree Sophia had described, a massive Sitka spruce easily 800 years old, its trunk wider than a car, and at its base, weathered but still intact, was a small woven basket. Cedar bark, precisely made, filled with berries that should have rotted in 7 days but hadn't. Hannah knelt beside it. She'd brought her own offering, a bundle of sage, a small carved figure of a bird, a written note in both English and Korean thanking the forest for the Morrison family's safe return and asking for continued protection for all who entered here. She placed these items carefully beside Sophia's basket. Then she stood and looked into the forest, into the shadows between the ancient trees where moss hung like curtains and ferns grew taller than a man. "I see you," she said quietly. "I know you're there, and I respect you. Just, please, let them find their way home when they lose the path. Let the children be children. Let time run the way it's supposed to." The forest was silent. No birds sang, no wind moved the branches. Hannah stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of thousands of years of growth, of patience, of memory. Then she heard it, very faint, carried on a breeze that wasn't blowing, singing. A woman's voice, old as the forest, singing in a language that predated English, predated Spanish, maybe predated language itself. Hannah didn't try to follow the sound. She simply bowed once, respectfully, and walked back the way she'd come. Behind her, unseen, something moved between the trees. Tall, wrong proportions, carrying a basket on its back that wept with the voices of children who'd forgotten their own names. It watched Hannah's retreat, and then it turned and walked deeper into the forest where the trees were older still, where time pooled in strange eddies, where the basket was never quite full and never quite empty, and always, always hungry. 6 months later, Hannah received a letter. It was from Sophia Morrison, now living with her family in Montana under slightly different names, enrolled in schools appropriate to their new apparent ages. The letter was brief. "Dear Hannah, we're okay. It's weird, but we're okay. Owen is adjusting better than me. He was younger, so he doesn't remember as much. Mom and Dad are in therapy. We all are. I wanted to tell you something I didn't tell you before. When Owen sang the song and the basket lady let us out, she spoke to me, just once. Her voice sounded like wind through really old trees. She said, 'Tell the one who asks questions that I am patience. I am the price of forgetting. I am what waits when the warnings are ignored.' I don't know what that means exactly, but I think you should know. Also, I started having dreams about the other kids, the ones still in the basket. I draw them sometimes. I've drawn 47 different faces so far. I'm sending you copies. Maybe you can find out who they were. Maybe their families are still looking for them. Maybe someone should remember them, even if they can't come home. Thank you for believing us. Sophia." Enclosed were 47 hand-drawn portraits, children from different eras wearing different clothes, different hairstyles. A boy in 1960s short pants and thick glasses. A girl with 1980s permed hair. A toddler in Depression-era worn overalls. A teenager in 1940s saddle shoes. Hannah spread them across her desk and felt her heart break. These were real children. Children who'd vanished into the forest decades ago, maybe centuries ago. Children whose families had searched and grieved and eventually moved on, never knowing their sons and daughters were still there, still young, still trapped in a basket that existed outside of time. She couldn't save them. Sophia was right about that. They were beyond saving, beyond time, beyond the reach of any human agency. But she could remember them. Hannah started a file. Off the books, unofficial. She called it The Forgotten Ones. She began researching missing children cases in the Pacific Northwest, going back as far as records existed. When she found matches for the faces in Sophia's drawings, she added their names, their dates of disappearance, their families' names. Tommy Chen, age 7, missing from a Boy Scout campout in 1962. Sarah Whitmore, age 9, disappeared during a family picnic in 1978. Jesse Blackwood, age 6, vanished from a tribal gathering in 1945. On and on. 47 names, 47 stories, 47 families who never got closure. Hannah couldn't bring them home, but she could make sure they weren't forgotten. And every month on the first Tuesday, she hiked to that ancient Sitka spruce and left an offering. Not to bargain, not to plead, just to remember. To acknowledge what was there. To respect the things that lived in places where time pooled and patience was measured in centuries. The basket lady never appeared to her, but sometimes in the deepest part of the forest where the trail faded and the trees pressed close, Hannah would hear singing, ancient, patient, hungry, and she would turn back every time. Because there are some mysteries you don't solve, some horrors you don't fight, some truths you learn to live with, carrying them like stones in your pocket, heavy and cold and permanent. The world is bigger than what you know, and older, and stranger, and full of things that waited before you were born and will wait long after you're gone. All you can do is teach the children the old songs, and hope they remember when it matters.